Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Born on May 23, 1973, in a small Tennessee town, Matthew Winkler came from a family where religion was very important. His life was centered around church activities from a young age, and his parents, who were devout Christians, gave him a solid moral foundation grounded in Christian principles. Matthew was taught the value and strength of faith at a young age, and it seems that his relationship with God served as his beacon. He was the youngest of 4 children, and despite their lack of wealth, the family was content, despite their financial struggles. Although Matthew enjoyed his studies, it wasn't until he was in his teens that he realized his true calling when he started participating in church ministries and assisting with youth events. He exuded confidence, charm, and a unique ability to connect with others. He made the decision to become a pastor at the age of 18, having already completed his education. Following his high school graduation, Matthew enrolled at Henderson, Tennessee's Freed-Hardeman College. Students from all over the nation who were looking for a theological education were drawn to this university because of its strong Christian tradition. Despite his concentration on his studies, Matthew remembered to engage in extracurricular activities. He served as the soccer team's captain. He frequently planned events for students and took an active part in campus life. He immediately made a name for himself as a leader among his peers thanks to his enthusiasm and drive. He met Mary, his future wife, at the same college. Despite attending the same college, Mary's personality was very different from Matthew's. She was quiet and unassuming, and even though their paths crossed at different occasions, she did not receive the same level of attention as he did. Born in Tennessee, Mary came from a traditional family. Her family always upheld modest values, and she had a mild upbringing. She was more concerned with building a family hearth than she was with ambition, unlike Matthew. However, they were united by their shared religious convictions and a desire to serve God. Matthew first became acquainted with Mary while she was volunteering for student council-organized projects on campus. Her kindness and gentleness of heart impressed him. Mary wasn't looking for attention. She was not overlooked. He started their friendship, which swiftly developed into a more committed partnership for someone with Matthew's charm. Surprisingly, Matthew's vivacious personality was ideally matched by Mary's serene and prudent disposition. They were soon inseparable. The couple started assisting the underprivileged, volunteering at community events, and working together on church projects. In addition to being his wife, Matthew viewed Mary as a ministry partner who shared his philosophy of life. Mary, however, believed she had found a man who shared her beliefs and was supportive. After graduating from college, they got married and relocated to Selmer, where Matthew accepted a position as a pastor at the nearby Church of Christ. There was more to the Church of Christ in Selmer than just worship. It served as the town's most significant hub for activity. It was situated on a hill with a lovely garden all around, and the congregation always congregated there. The entire town seemed to have assembled for prayer. Matthew immediately won over the locals with his innate charm and talent for communication. He planned a lot of charity concerts, youth classes, and events to aid the underprivileged. Everyone was talking about him, and he rose to prominence in the community. Mary actively assisted him in this ministry in spite of her modesty. She was present when Matthew took care of the house, assisted with event planning, and delivered significant announcements to the congregation. She stayed in the background, unlike her husband, but everyone could always see how much she loved and cared for her family. The Winklers seemed to be the ideal family. Patricia, Mary, Alice, and Brianna are the 3 daughters that Matthew and Mary raised. You could frequently hear the children's laughter reverberating throughout the house because they were energetic and full of fun. The sisters were close and, even though they were young, already exhibited the same Christian values as their parents. But there was a very bad life going on behind the closed doors of their home. The tension between Matthew and Mary was occasionally apparent to those who knew the family a little better. Although some claimed that Matthew was an overly strict man, the rumors never spread beyond a small circle. Matthew was a man of strong character. In a small town, people hardly ever talked about such things openly, but their children, who were always happy and gregarious, showed no signs of trouble for most of them. The Winklers were still a role model. It started out as a typical spring morning on March 22. As the Christ Church congregation started to assemble for services, the town was just starting to awaken. The air was filled with the aroma of freshly cut grass and coffee poured into thermoses that residents frequently brought to meetings. But soon after, the unsettling news that Pastor Matthew had failed to arrive at church broke the stillness of that morning. He never skipped Sunday services, so this was out of the ordinary. After unsuccessful attempts to contact him, a number of parishioners visited his home to check on him. They saw that the door was unlocked and the windows were draped as they got closer to the house. Given how strict the Winkler family had always been about security, this seemed strange. They knew something had gone wrong as soon as they were inside. It was too quiet in the house. A distressing call was placed to emergency number 91 at 9 a.m. Matthew Winkler was the pastor of the Church of Christ, where James Barker, the caller, was a parishioner. Barker stated that because Matthew had not shown up for the morning service, he and a few other churchgoers who were worried about the pastor had made the decision to pay him a visit at his house. A few minutes after the call, Barker found Matthew's body in his bedroom, and police officers quickly arrived on the scene. In order to avoid interfering with the investigation, Barker and other parishioners had already left the house. The house appeared to be in good condition upon first inspection, but the atmosphere was strange. The only evidence of violence or damage in the house was the fight in the bedroom. There was no sign of the family's presence, as if they had just left the house. The police officers were astounded by the house's unremarkable appearance as soon as they entered it. There was an incomplete breakfast in the kitchen, toys on the floor, and cups of leftover coffee on the table in the living room. However, the initially seemingly normal atmosphere did not match what the police officers soon learned when they entered the bedroom. They saw Matthew Winkler's body right away. He was on the bed, face down, in pajamas that showed obvious signs of abuse. Death had finally caught up with him, as was later revealed. The pastor had a noticeable large wound on his back a few hours prior, which was clearly caused by a gunshot, but the gun itself was not present in the room. The police observed that the gunshot shell casing was on the ground as they placed Matthew's body down. This immediately suggested the presence of a firearm, but none was found. There was evidence of a struggle in the bedroom. The nightstand had been knocked over, and books and personal items were all over the floor. As though someone had attempted to hide or flee, the sheet was partially hanging off the bed, and the bedding was wrinkled. This implied that at the time of the crime, the victim and the offender were engaged in combat. A few crucial details were also noted by forensic investigators who arrived soon after the police. The family had gotten up early that day and was getting ready for their morning duties, as evidenced by the empty bottles of shampoo and shower gel in the bathroom. But there were concerns about Matthew's own death in the bedroom and his absence from the church service. The shoe tracks that did not match Matthew's shoes, however, were the most interesting discovery. Someone was in the room when the crime was committed, as evidenced by prints found on the carpet near the bed. The pastor's shoes were not the same size as these footprints. This suggested a potential offender who might have been both directly involved in the incident and a witness to the murder. On one of the night tables, police also discovered a partial palm print that they later determined belonged to Mary Winkler. Her whereabouts were unknown at the time of the murder, but the print provided unmistakable proof that she was present at the scene, making this fact contentious. A child's note was left on the kitchen refrigerator by the family's eldest daughter. The paper said, "Daddy, you are loved." In the midst of the tragedy, the message was especially poignant and made investigators wonder about the motivations behind the crime. After examining the house and documenting important evidence, police started questioning. James Barker, who saw the first events, was the first person interviewed. Barker attested that he and a number of parishioners visited the residence early on March 22 in order to locate the pastor, who had not arrived for service. The next question posed by a neighbor is whether the perpetrator knew the family, because he also stated that there were no indications of violence or forced entry in the house, who also claimed that he saw Mary Winkler on March 21st in the evening. According to him, there were no indications of tension or conflict, and the Winkler family seemed friendly and at ease. The Winkler family was described by numerous witnesses as calm and amiable, so this turned out to be a crucial point. Soon after, the police started interrogating the church employees, who also attested to the absence of any indications of disputes or questionable activities, but it soon became apparent that nobody had any clue as to where Mary and the kids might have gone. The main thing that caught people's attention right away was that Mary and the Winkler kids were nowhere to be found. The family may have been kidnapped or on the run because their car was out of place. This turned into the primary query that investigators were attempting to address. Following the discovery of Matthew's body, a massive search was launched for the Winklers' vehicle, and hotels and gas stations were inspected for possible routes Mary might have taken. When police learned that the Nissan Quest minivan had vanished, they immediately began a manhunt for it. Every patrol team within a few hundred kilometers was told to keep an eye out for vehicles that fit the description. Investigators also asked for surveillance footage from gas stations and major highways. Because Selmer is a small town, there were few options for escape routes, which gave police hope that the missing men would be found soon. The car was seen on a surveillance camera at a gas station in northern Alabama, roughly 200 kilometers from the crime scene, a few hours after the search started. 3 kids were in the backseat of the car, and the driver was a woman, according to the video. Although her motivations were still unknown, this discovery was the first concrete indication that Mary had left the state with the kids. Police started looking through Mary's cell phone's messages and calls while they searched for the car. Cellular carrier's information indicated that her phone was in operation in the Jackson, Alabama area. During the time that the car was spotted, Mary made a number of brief phone calls, none of which were to friends or family. This demonstrated her prudence and desire to avoid leaving an overt trace. Calls made the day before the murder were also examined by investigators. One significant discovery was that Mary had spoken with the bank where the family had a loan about their financial troubles. Based on this information, police theorized that strange financial relationships might have been the driving force behind the crime. Examining Mary's financial activity was another crucial area of attention. The family booked accommodations at a small Jackson motel using their credit card. Police were able to further focus their search as a result, and on March 23, 2006, just over 24 hours after Matthew Winkler's body was found, they went straight to the address that was provided. Mary Winkler and her 3 kids were discovered by police in a motel in Jackson. A tiny room with 2 beds was occupied by the family. Mary opened the door almost instantly when the officers knocked. She didn't appear panicked, but she did look exhausted. She later discovered that she had purchased the toys her 3 daughters were playing with on the way in. There was no opposition to Mary's arrest. After giving him a hug, the woman calmly climbed into the police car. The investigators were taken aback by her actions. She didn't try to escape or defend herself. She merely said, "I knew you would find us." This was a crucial detail because it showed that she was aware that she was going to be arrested. The kids were treated by psychologists at a nearby social assistance center. They looked healthy at first glance, but they were confused and didn't know what was going on. Patricia, the oldest daughter, informed center employees that her mother had asked them to be obedient while they were on a brief vacation. Investigators also spoke with people who knew the Winklers, including Mary. While neighbors characterized the family as amiable and successful, others noted that Mary had recently appeared to be depressed. According to one of her friends, she hardly ever interacted with people outside of her family and church. According to Matthew's church colleagues, he was a strict man, particularly when it came to family matters. This was inconsistent with the public portrayal of their happy marriage. The Winklers had substantial debts, according to officials at the bank where the family's loan was arranged, and a member of the congregation remembered that Mary had appeared distracted and depressed the day before. The bank sent a letter requesting repayment shortly before the tragedy. The family may have become tense as a result of this. The testimony of witnesses and the evidence collected suggested that the couple's relationship was not as perfect as it seemed. According to Mary, Matthew was emotionally harsh and frequently chastised her, but at the time following Mary's wink, there was no proof of physical abuse. Was taken into custody by police at a motel in Jackson Township. Investigators sought to ascertain her involvement in her husband's murder, and she consented to an interview. Despite appearing exhausted and depressed, the woman maintained her composure. She maintained that what happened was an accident, but her confession became the main focus of the case. Mary made it clear right away during her initial interrogation that she had no intention of concealing her role in the incidents. "It was an accident, but I did it." Her voice trembled as she told investigators about Matthew's death, but she responded to inquiries promptly and clearly. Although she acknowledged that she had picked up a shotgun the night of the murder, she maintained that she had no plans to kill her husband. Mary said it was a tense night. She claimed that she and Matthew had argued about money issues that had been accumulating for months. She claimed that Matthew had accused her of mishandling their finances and of keeping bank correspondence about their debt hidden from him. Mary remembered him telling her that I had ruined everything. Following her husband's remarks that evening, Mary disclosed that she felt depressed and humiliated. According to her, Matthew was frequently severe and insisted on complete order in the home. However, his criticism had gotten especially harsh in the last few months. He allegedly discussed that evening how her behavior had put the family in danger of going bankrupt. Following that altercation, Mary acknowledged that she felt confined. She said that in order to get her husband to listen, she took a shotgun. She claims that she only wanted him to stop yelling and had no intention of hurting him. He was standing by the bed when she came up to him, explaining that she had taken the weapon from a closet in the bedroom. I wanted him to see me in a new light. I wished he would stop yelling. I said, she said. Mary said she had no idea how the weapon operated. She claimed she didn't have time to realize anything because it happened so fast. All I can recall is the sound. It was really noisy. She recalled realizing what had happened when she watched Matthew fall onto the bed following the shooting. Mary recalled that she first froze in place after the shooting because she was in shock and unsure of what to do next. She couldn't get close to her husband to check on him. Instead, she hurried to the children's rooms, where they were already asleep, woke them up, hurriedly packed her things and walked out of the house. Mary claimed she was in total shock and was worried that no one would comprehend her when investigators questioned her about why she didn't call the police or an ambulance. With no specific objective in mind, she simply wanted to get as far away as she could, so she climbed into the family minivan and drove off, taking her kids with her. According to her, Mary denied that she was attempting to conceal or get away with it. She claims that she chose to simply leave because she was unsure of what to do. She added that protecting her kids was her first priority. Mary's confession raised a lot of questions, but also provided investigators with a foundation for prosecution. The shotgun needed a lot of force to pull the trigger and remove the safety, according to forensic specialists who examined the weapon. The fact that Mary brought the gun with her raised suspicions among the police, who began to wonder if the shooting was really an accident. Investigators suspected this was a deliberate choice or an attempt to conceal evidence after the murder. Despite being emotional, Mary's own confession did not rule out a premeditated crime. In an interview with psychologists, Patricia, the family's eldest daughter, claimed to have heard her parents talking loudly the night before the trip. The girl remembered that her mother had later entered the room, woken her up, and informed her that they were leaving, but she did not understand what was being said. Mary's claim that she left the house right away after the murder was supported by this testimony. To prevent traumatizing the children, the investigation used their testimony with caution. They did, however, support the idea that Mary acted emotionally, even though her actions following the shooting continued to be unpredictable. Investigators concluded that Mary's confession contained enough evidence to bring charges of second-degree murder. Her acknowledgement that she fired the shot herself, the fingerprints found at the scene, and the fact that the gun was found in the car's trunk were the primary contributing factors. After conducting interviews and compiling evidence, investigators also explained her attempts to escape to another state and her escape with her children, which they viewed as avoidance behavior. Prosecutors intended to present the case in a way that would demonstrate Mary's actions went beyond chance, so she was moved to the county jail to await trial. What was ahead was a trial that would spark extensive public outrage and become a national conversation point not just in Tennessee. The trial had a national impact. In the spring of 2007, Mary Winkler's trial got underway in the Tennessee District Court. The case immediately sparked widespread public interest. Journalists from across the nation attended the hearings, in addition to Selmer residents. On the one hand, Mary was portrayed by the prosecution as a cold-blooded killer. The defense, however, contended that Mary suffered from years of emotional suppression and domestic abuse, which ultimately caused the tragic result. From the outset of the trial, the prosecution adopted a tough posture. Using evidence from forensic experts, prosecutors contended that Mary Winkler killed her husband voluntarily. They presented evidence that Mary's behavior the night of the murder was motivated and purposeful. The necessity of removing the safety and purposefully pulling the trigger on the weapon that fired the shot was one of the main points of contention. According to experts, the shotgun was operational and difficult to fire, so this was not an accident. Prosecutors also emphasized Mary's actions following the murder, including her running from the scene, disappearing with her kids, and trying to escape to another state, all of which suggested that she knew what she had done. In order to demonstrate that Mary's actions were intentional, the prosecution presented surveillance footage of her filling up her car and using a bank card as proof. Prosecutors contended that she fled in an effort to escape accountability rather than phoning the police or an ambulance. According to the prosecution, the couple's relationship tensions stemming from financial difficulties were the driving force behind the crime. The family's significant debts were disclosed by the bank in court documents. The prosecution claims that Mary concealed letters from creditors, which sparked a dispute the night of the murder. Prosecutors tried to show that the woman's decision to divorce her husband was ultimately prompted by this circumstance because they felt he controlled her and put psychological pressure on her. Mary's choice to hide the weapon in the car trunk following the murder caught the attention of the prosecution. Prosecutors emphasized throughout the trial that a person who unintentionally fired a shot would not have taken such actions, and that this was not only an attempt to conceal evidence, but also another sign that her actions were conscious. In contrast, Mary's defense centered on her emotional state and the aspects of her family life that might have contributed to the tragedy. Mary acted rashly under intense stress and fear, according to the defense lawyers. They attempted to demonstrate that the flight was the product of shock and panic, and that the shooting was an accident. The assertion that Mary had been experiencing emotional and psychological distress served as the primary defense. She told the court for years that her husband dominated every part of her life, frequently criticized her, and made decisions for the whole family. Mary's lawyers claimed that these situations made her feel scared and powerless, which ultimately caused her to lose it during her testimony. Mary stated that she took the shotgun that evening to persuade her husband to listen to her and cease the abuse, not to murder him. She maintained that the shooting was unintentional. Mary could have acted under the influence of stress and emotional distress, according to a psychologist the defense brought to the trial. The expert pointed out that people frequently do things they wouldn't normally do when they're depressed and afraid. Her actions following the murder were another area of focus for the attorneys. They maintained that she did not intentionally try to hide the crime when she fled. Mary's instinctive defense was to leave the scene of the tragedy with her children because she was afraid that no one would understand her. Mary appeared depressed long before the tragedy, according to defense witnesses, some of whom were close friends of Mary. They recalled that she seldom expressed her emotions, but occasionally brought up the fact that her husband could be too strict. These testimonies enhanced the overall picture of the family's relationship, even though they were insufficient to prove abuse. The jury deliberated for several hours before rendering a decision. Mary Winkler's manslaughter conviction was upheld. Although her behavior following the shooting suggested responsibility for what transpired, the court believed there was not enough evidence to consider her actions fully conscious. Due to a scheduling conflict with one of the attorneys on June 8, 2007, the sentencing phase was postponed from its original start date of May 18, 2007. A judge in Tennessee sent a yease on the manslaughter charge. Mary Winkler received a sentence of 210 days in prison. According to her record, she had already completed 5 months of that time, and the judge permitted her to spend up to 60 days in a Tennessee mental health facility. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. This is the story of a murderer who avoided punishment for years, despite numerous facts pointing to his involvement in a small town. A 13-year-old girl vanished, and it was not discovered until 24 hours later. This case remained unsolved for over 10 years, and it was finally resolved in the summer of 2021. In this video, we'll explain what happened to Haley Dunn. This story was set in the American town of Colorado City, Texas. This location is typical of low-rise America, covering 14 square kilometers. On Christmas Day 2010, the town had a New Year's vibe. Haley Dunn, a 13-year-old girl living with her mother Billy, boyfriend Sean, and older brother David, had a happy Christmas. Her mother divorced her father, Clint, when she was 10 years old, but they never stopped communicating. Her father lived across the street from Haley's house. On December 26th, the girl spent the majority of Christmas at her father's house, unwrapping presents before returning home to play video games and go to bed. The following day, her stepfather and mother went to work as usual. Billy left her cell phone at home so that the kids could reach her. Before leaving, she peeked into her daughter's room while she was still sleeping. Sean worked in another town, about a half-hour drive away. According to him, he had an argument with his boss that day, which led to him being fired and leaving work only 10 minutes after arriving. He then drove to his mother's house, where he spent some time before returning to Colorado City around 3 p.m. Sean went to pick up Billy from work that evening. When they arrived home, Billy noticed that her daughter was not there. Sean informed her that the girl had gone to her father's house and planned to spend the night at a friend's house. Haley frequently stayed overnight at friends' houses, so her mother took this information calmly. Small towns like this often have the illusion of safety, so parents are less worried about their child's safety. On December 28th, Haley did not return home. She went door to door, but no one saw the girl that day. Billy went to the police around 2 p.m., but they chose the easiest route. The police's main theory was that she had fled from home, which initially hampered the investigation. A voluntary escape is not investigated to the same extent as a missing minor. They searched Billy and Clint's houses and brought search dogs to the scene. The next day, they followed Haley's trail from the house to a nearby motel. It was extremely strange. None of the motel employees had seen this girl. She was not captured on any security cameras, and a thorough search of the premises yielded no results. Trained dogs pointed to a motel, but the girl apparently never arrived. As word of Haley's disappearance spread throughout the city, dozens of concerned citizens joined the search. Some looked around the area, while others printed and distributed flyers. And now we come to another strange moment. Clint, the girl's father, almost never left the street. He looked in every corner, nook and cranny, including dumpsters. He said he couldn't sit at home and wait. Meanwhile, Billy and Sean were less enthusiastic. The mother distributed flyers but refused to go around the neighborhood looking for her daughter. She stated that searching gave her the impression that they were already looking for her body, and that there was no hope of finding the girl alive. Sean didn't participate at all, which isn't the strangest thing. Billy and Sean hosted a New Year's Eve party on December 31st, 4 days after the girl had gone missing. They had friends over to listen to music, drink, and party. Without a trace seemed completely absurd. On January 3rd, a week after Haley vanished, the police officially declared her missing. This meant that more serious agencies, such as the FBI and the Texas Rangers, could become involved, and representatives from both arrived in Colorado City and began their investigation. Volunteers continued to search the area, and over 100 billboards about the missing girl were posted across Texas and beyond. Detectives completely ruled out the possibility of an escape. For one reason, they couldn't figure out why Haley would choose to take such a step. The day before her disappearance, she had been in a good mood, and for the rest of the time, the girl showed no signs of a desire to flee. Second, all of her belongings were left in the room. If the girl had decided to flee, she would have taken something with her. The detectives quickly realized they needed to look closer at Billy and Sean. Their passive response to the girl's search and the New Year's Eve party made one wonder if they cared about Haley. The detectives discovered that on December 27th, the same day Haley allegedly spent the night at a friend's house, Sean and Billy drew $140 from their bank cards. They admitted that the money was used to buy illegal substances, which the couple consumed that evening while their children were away. Billy failed on 2 attempts. During the first interrogation, she was under the influence of drugs, and the second result revealed she was lying. Sean failed 2 interrogations and walked away before answering the third. Billy suspected Sean was involved in her daughter's disappearance and demanded that he leave her home. On January 12th, police officially announced that Sean was being treated as a suspect. Several factors contributed to this conclusion, including the couple's strained relationship. The police examined Sean's phone's geolocation data and discovered that his account of the day Haley disappeared did not match reality. He did arrive at work and stayed for 10 minutes before returning to Colorado City to Billy's house. It wasn't until later that he drove to his mother's house. It's worth noting that the police tracked the phone's location. The girl repeatedly mentioned being afraid of Sean. Haley told her best friend that she preferred to spend time outside or at friends' houses because she didn't feel safe with Sean. She once told her grandmother that she often saw Sean standing in front of her bedroom door in the middle of the night, and she was afraid he would come in. The police soon became aware of a conversation with Haley's uncle about the girl's disappearance. Her uncle said roughly the following: "I can't believe anyone would harm a child." Sean's response was extremely unusual. He compared it to killing a deer with all of this information in hand. The detectives concluded that Haley did not come from a wealthy family. Her mother and stepfather frequently drank and used illegal drugs, and Sean's behavior at parties appeared suspicious, but there was no direct evidence against him. Finally, the police contacted child welfare, who decided to remove Haley's older brother. On February 24th, police searched Sean and Billy's home, as well as his mother's. A massive discovery awaited them. They discovered over 100,000 obscene images of minors on a removable drive and a hard drive. The police also seized his laptop, but did not appear to have time to examine its contents. Sean's father arrived at the station and demanded his son's equipment back. It's unclear why the police did, but that's not the most interesting part. Sean received no punishment for having so much illegal content on his computer. On March 17th, police officers visited Billy's house to question Sean. A woman opened the door and said he wasn't home, but the officer showed her a pre-arranged warrant and entered the house, discovering Sean hiding there for concealing a suspect. Billy received 90 days in jail and a year in corrections. She was transferred to a Travis County Correctional Facility. Following her release, she remained in the area with Sean in 2012. However, the couple eventually split. Billy suspected Sean was involved in her daughter's disappearance, but the case had stalled due to a lack of new evidence and volunteers' inability to identify the girl. On March 16, 2013, a hiker discovered human remains near Lake J.B. Thomas in Scary County. Experts conducted tests and determined that the remains belonged to Haley Dunn, whose body was approximately 20 miles away from her home. However, they had circumstantial evidence that the girl's body had been discovered only a few miles from Sean's mother's house, which matched the geolocation data on his phone as determined by the towers. Given the short distance, Sean could have easily left the body in that location without anyone knowing. Furthermore, he grew up in the area and was well versed in where to hide the body, but investigators were unable to uncover any additional clues, and the case was refrozen for several years. Despite this, the girl's family had to wait 4 years to bury her body. A memorial service was held in January 2017. In 2018, Haley's father, Clint, stated that he believed Sean and Billy were guilty in his version. His mother either helped conceal the truth or was directly involved in the murder. During the same year, he began conducting numerous interviews and attempted to actively publicize the case. The man stated that in the early years of the investigation, he tried not to bother the police with constant questions, but his patience had run out. The detectives did little to investigate, and his last hope was to spread the word widely in an attempt to bring the perpetrators to justice, which paid off. In 2019, an unknown person wrote to Clint, informing him that in 2011, he discovered several items that could have belonged to Haley. This person was in high school at the time and had not heard about the missing girl, so he did not consider reporting his find to the police. True information about the items has yet to be revealed, and the police have not stated what they are. Clint only mentioned that they were discovered in an area that had been thoroughly searched by volunteers and police. Later, new information emerged. Private investigator Erica Moore, who was handling the Haley case and kept in touch with Clint, revealed some disturbing information about Sean. In October 2019, she began receiving messages from various women in Texas, all of whom claimed they were being aggressively harassed online by a man named Casey. Not only was he harassing them with lewd messages, but he was also sending them explicit photos and videos of himself, as Sean shared a middle name. Erica asked the women to send her photos and videos of the man sending the girls, and her theory was confirmed to be correct. She persuaded one woman to go to the police station and report Sean, but they refused to press charges and even accused her of falsifying the facts. Erica believed Sean was responsible for Haley's death and planned to arrest him for stalking women on the internet. However, the case remained quiet until May 2021 when Erica and Clint were summoned to the district attorney's office for an urgent meeting. Police arrested Sean and charged him with Haley's murder. He is currently in Vail, awaiting trial on $20 million bail, but police have yet to reveal what new evidence led them to make this arrest. Apparently, this information will be kept secret until the trial. All we know now is that the police were granted permission to collect Sean's DNA sample shortly before his arrest. There may be a connection here to Haley's belongings, which were discovered in 2011. When Billy learned of her ex-boyfriend's arrest, she made a strange statement. She said she wasn't surprised Sean was involved in the murder, and she wanted to believe in his innocence until the very end. She also thanked God that the man would now be punished for his actions, which Billy had actively obstructed during the initial investigation while defending Sean. A date for the trial will be announced soon. At this point, it is difficult to predict whether a conviction will be obtained. It will be determined solely by the significance of the evidence, which police are now withholding in any case. Sean remained at large for over 10 years, despite the fact that all evidence pointed to his involvement in the murder. Haley's complaints to friends and relatives, the use of forbidden materials with children, and the man's constant lies during interrogations raised suspicions on all sides, as did Billy. She initially expressed no desire for justice for her daughter, Clint, but, unlike her, he worked hard and got his way. In one interview, Erica Moore hinted that the case would not have been solved without his participation. She did not provide any details, but we can recall the story of Haley's found objects. The person who discovered them only learned about the entire story through Clint's social media posts. More information about this case, including a court decision, will undoubtedly be released in the near future. Right now, all indications are that Sean will be convicted, and in Texas, that means only one thing: he will face the death penalty for his actions against the child. Unfortunately, there is no way this will help Haley Dunn live a long and happy life anymore. Please share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and thank you for watching. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. As they did almost every day of that year, Serena Tolson and her friend Israel spent the evening of January 23, 2012. The young couple was unaware of the descent of the dark night. They heard a scream while they were seated at a picnic table in the neighborhood park. Since it was 2:30 in the morning, it couldn't have been children playing. Israel and Serena ran toward the source of the shrill scream when it recurred. The scene that played out in front of them looked like the bloodiest horror film ever. A man was hovering over a girl in the middle of the road, repeatedly stabbing her with a knife. Serena yelled for the man to stop as she ran toward him. Israel shoved the assailant away from the girl, but the man got up and fled back to his car as Serena was calling the emergency hotline. With a bigger knife in his hands, he moved away from it. The two were pursued by the man. Israel and Serena dispersed in different directions, but when Serena turned around, she saw that he was going back to his victim to complete the task he had begun, not chasing after her. Serena was unable to speak because of the noise the big knife made as it entered the victim's body, and the girl saw him thrust it into her. The girl was dead, she told the operator. In the meantime, the man went to his vehicle, climbed in, and drove off. Melissa Dahm was born in the well-known resort city of Clearwater, Florida, which is renowned for its immaculate white beaches. Being the youngest in her family, Melissa was surrounded by her parents' and older siblings' love as she grew up. She never had any issues. She wanted to make her parents proud, so she did well in school. In an effort to become independent and self-sufficient, she secured a job at Dairy Curl to cover her own gas, insurance, and other costs. Before going to the beach to purchase ice cream, everyone would stop at Dairy Curl. Due to the cafe's proximity to her home and the frequent visits from her friends, Melissa loved her job there. Melissa first became aware of Robert Burton at Dairy Curl. Although he was a few years older than Melissa, they went to the same school. Robert's amiable and charming demeanor enthralled the girl. He was tender and kind. The young couple wanted to spend more and more time together, even though they seemed to be very different from one another. Robert didn't particularly enjoy getting together with friends, but Melissa was gregarious and energetic and loved spending time with them. In addition, Robert felt uneasy around his own family, whereas Melissa grew up in a close-knit household. He felt alienated in his own home because his mother had remarried and he had stepbrothers. He consequently began spending more time with Melissa's relatives. When Melissa discovered that Robert had not given up smoking as he had promised, it was the first red flag in their relationship. Although he expressed regret and pledged to stop lying to her, Melissa felt uneasy about being duped for such a long time. Their tension only grew after Robert persuaded her to abandon her aspirations of enrolling in a prominent university where she had been accepted. Melissa told everyone that she didn't want to leave the town, but in actuality, Robert was the main reason. Robert spent all of his time with her, which interfered with her work when she was able to secure a part-time job at the hospital, while still holding on to her dream of becoming a nurse like her mother. He would set up scenes, making her the guilty party, and persuading her that she was the reason behind their frequent arguments, even if she attempted to tactfully explain that her shift had only just started. Melissa, who was practically a teenager, didn't realize that Robert's actions were out of the ordinary and thought that was the case in all relationships. Melissa received an invitation from her sister to hang out on the beach with friends in the spring of 2011. Melissa's ex-boyfriend was brought up by one of the guys, which obviously upset Robert. He began acting like a child and stepping on her shoes from behind as they were making their way back to the parking lot. Despite knowing she wasn't at fault, the young man obviously wanted to get even with her. Melissa tried to escape him by running ahead of him, knowing he wouldn't stop. She turned around when she came to a small hill and yelled at him to stop acting like such a child, but he pushed her off the elevation without a word. The girl suffered severe scratches after falling down the hill. Her friends hurried to her aid when she cried out, but Robert went to the others and said Melissa had fallen, rather than running to her. Robert called Melissa a liar after she claimed he had shoved her. If Melissa's older sister hadn't stepped in and taken her home, it's unclear how the argument would have ended. The young couple shouldn't be left alone, in her opinion. Melissa's mother insisted that her daughter end the relationship with him after hearing about the incident, and the girl appeared to comply. But 2 weeks later, to her astonishment, Robert returned to her home. Their relationship completely changed as a result of this incident. He threatened to harm himself, which prevented Melissa from ending their relationship. Melissa and Robert were once more hanging out with friends on October 25, 2011. Melissa apparently felt more courageous than normal because she refused to go get cigarettes when Robert insisted on it. Clearly upset, the young man grabbed her car keys and demanded that they go to the gas station store together. Melissa subtly requested that the guys follow them in their cars since she could sense a storm coming. After noticing this tactic, Robert began to wonder if Melissa had spoken to them. Naturally, she denied it, but he was unable to relax. He began flinging Melissa's phone, keys, and bag across the street after they got home and she braked in the driveway. He hit the girl in the face after she screamed for him to stop. Melissa was clearly trying to beat Robert when he lunged at her, but she was able to hit him in the groin, get up, and flee. The girl recalled where her phone had been thrown by him. Reaching for it, she dialed 911, but she hesitated when it came time to hit the call button. Robert always threatened to kill her if she ever complained about him to anyone, after all. However, he was only 2 steps behind her when she turned around. She gained courage from that. She called the number and informed the emergency operator about the attack. She realized he wasn't pursuing her as she ran toward the intersection where the gas station was. She had the sudden thought that he was aware of the location of the keys he had thrown. As he always threatened, he would visit her home and murder her mother. It was Robert's primary means of controlling Melissa, because he was aware of how important her mother was to her. Melissa hurried back, terrified for her mother. Robert grabbed her as he leaped out from behind the bushes. He most likely would have given her a serious beating, but just then a patrol car arrived. Melissa couldn't believe he was holding her responsible for what had happened, so he yelled at her angrily, "So you really want to do this to me? You want me to get arrested?" The girl, still under Robert's influence, started pleading that instead of being arrested, he be sent to anger management classes or something. Regardless of what she said, the officers informed her that everyone had seen the incident and that he would be arrested. After escorting her home, the police officers spoke with her and her mother about domestic violence, explaining that victims frequently went back to their abusers and that they didn't want her to experience the same thing. After being taken into custody, Robert was accused of assault. But only 6 hours into his incarceration, he called Melissa the very next morning and insisted that she take him home. Luckily, she declined. January 23, 2012 was the date set for Robert's trial. Melissa had a good weekend with her friends because she didn't have to be at the trial. She was getting ready for her impending tests and gradually getting back to her regular life. However, the phone rang in the middle of the night while she was soundly asleep. Robert was the one. He called again, but Melissa didn't answer. Reluctantly, she replied, Robert informed her that he was close to her residence. He begged for a final farewell meeting while in tears, saying that he just wanted to give her one last hug and that they shouldn't part on such a sour note. The girl reluctantly consented and, believing she could manage the situation, retrieved her phone, keys, and pepper spray, but she knew it was a big mistake the moment she stepped outside. Unfortunately, the girl was too ashamed to turn around because Robert had already noticed her. She hoped to bid him farewell as soon as possible and then go back to bed to rest before her test. The young man came up to her and gave her a tight hug, and then she heard a click. He pulled out his pocket knife. With great force, he hit her, striking her throat, face, and shoulders. Melissa let out a cry and struggled for her life. Suddenly, a girl came out of the shadows and told him to stop. Melissa reached for the girl's hand even though she didn't know her and wasn't sure how she could help. She hoped to call for assistance when she noticed a phone in her hands. Israel complied with Serena's instruction to push the assailant away from the girl at the same moment, because that was her name. Robert got up and walked calmly to his car. Robert abruptly started chasing after them as Serena went up to Melissa and was ready to take her hand. Fearing she would be his second victim, the girl was frightened. She reported the attack to 911 while she was running. However, she turned around to see that the man had gone back to finish what he had begun with the bloodied girl on the ground. The girl was dead, Serena was sure. In actuality, Melissa was still conscious, but she was certain that everything would end when Robert ran her over with his car. That evening, Clearwater police officer Melissa Harris was working on paperwork in her patrol car when a radio call regarding a crime was received. She was told that the man who had attacked the girl had driven off in a red pickup truck, and that a dead girl was lying on the side of the road on the north side of the park, but there was nobody there when she got there. Unable to comprehend what was going on, she slowly looked around the park. Melissa was certain Robert was aware that assistance was on the way, and that everything needed to be completed as soon as possible. In order to prevent him from running her over with his car, she crawled and did everything she could to get off the road. Her neighbor's mailbox was close to two sizable cement piles. She knew that the cement and the mailbox would keep her safe if she could crawl there. She even succeeded in getting to her feet at one point. The weary girl reached the mailbox, collapsed in the dirt, and heard his car just pull away. It grew very quiet, slowly. Melissa thought she was going to die. When she was illuminated by a police car's spotlight, she prayed for sin forgiveness. Officer Melissa Harris acknowledges that she had never witnessed anything like it in her years of police work. The victim had numerous wounds, many of which were still heavily bleeding, and her teeth had been knocked out. However, she was able to provide Melissa with Robert's name, address, birth date, and car make in addition to Melissa's own name. To dispel any uncertainty regarding the identity of the offender, she even spelled out his last name. The girl whispered that she could now go after giving all the information. But the oncoming medics stopped her from closing her eyes because they knew she might not wake up again if she did. Melissa's mother woke up as they struggled to treat her most serious injuries. The woman was asked to accompany the police officer, who had already arrived at their house after the girl had been attacked, because her daughter had also been attacked. She was positive that Melissa was sleeping upstairs because the police had misidentified the door. She realized, however, that the officer was pressing her along in order to get her to see Melissa before it was too late. Every second that went by made Melissa's condition worse. She was clearly in need of helicopter transportation. Cameron, a firefighter who also showed up on the scene, recommended landing on the football field. He marked the landing area with signal cones after jumping over the fence. Melissa was placed on a stretcher in a matter of minutes. Nobody thought she would live, and her condition was critical. Cameron, however, felt somehow certain that he would see her again as he watched the helicopter take off. Melissa came dangerously close to death multiple times on the operating table. Her body just didn't have enough blood, and her heart had a hard time pumping it. As a result, while transfusing blood on one hand, the doctors attempted to halt the bleeding on the other. 3 hours later, she was still breathing and squeezing the surgeon's hand feebly. It was only at that point that the weary medical staff decided to take a break and let the patient and themselves rest. The police radio announced that Robert had been spotted in the city in the morning. Presumably to wash away Melissa's blood, he made a stop at a store and purchased a large amount of water. He then went to Walmart to buy sleeping pills and had a meal at McDonald's. His vehicle was then discovered wrecked in a store. The young man was discovered unconscious behind the wheel. The vehicle caught fire after the wheel carved a hole in the ground from the prolonged operation. After being brought to the hospital, the man was shocked to learn that his victim had lived. At first, Robert maintained his innocence by saying he wasn't himself. He suddenly admitted his guilt, though, after the psychiatric evaluation determined that he was not insane and the court date was set. He received a life sentence without the chance of release. Melissa was hospitalized for 3 weeks. She had to retrain herself to walk, talk, eat, and even close her eyes. Melissa was asked to speak at a violence victim center after she recovered completely. Even though she was extremely anxious, she couldn't help but notice that 2 young firefighters were sitting in the front row, paying close attention to her every move. As it happened, Chief Cameron had called to let them know Melissa would be speaking close by and suggested they surprise her. The fact that Melissa was the same girl he had assisted in rescuing in the helicopter astounded Cameron. After introducing himself, Cameron invited Melissa and her mother to their fire station for a celebratory lunch. The youths were essentially inseparable after that day. Cameron restored Melissa's love for life, even though she was certain she would never date again. Later, when she was asked to ceremoniously open a baseball game, Cameron ran up to her and asked, "Will you marry me?" Melissa naturally said yes, and the two fell in love, and were married in 2017. Never date an ex-partner after a relationship breakup is Melissa's main piece of advice as a lawyer who advocates for the rights of victims of violence. Even she was unaware of the potential danger. She believes she lived to fulfill the vital duty of assisting young women who feel they are undeserving of respect and true love, despite having nearly died. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. When 9-year-old Charlotte Senna abruptly vanished in the middle of the crowded park in Greenfield, New York, a fun and laid-back day in the park turned into every parent's worst nightmare. Charlotte appeared to disappear into thin air, but dozens of people immediately began looking for her. In a matter of seconds, the nation's attention was drawn to the Charlotte disappearance case, a terrifying story of a kidnapping, endless searches, and an amazing turn of events that left everyone in shock when the kidnapper gave a crucial clue to solving the case. Possibly more than one, this thriller is full of unexpected twists and events that unfold before our eyes. Charlotte Senna, a 9-year-old 4th grader, lives in Greenfield, Saratoga County with her 2 sisters ages 4 and 10 and her parents, David and Trish. Her mother is a food inspector for the Stewart Shops chain, and her father, David, is a pipeline mechanic. Charlotte's parents are a typical working family, and they never would have thought that their daughter would be the object of a repeat criminal who wants to use her to help him out financially. Evidently, though, nobody is immune to the nightmare that has become reality. Charlotte was having a picnic with her family and friends on Saturday, September 30th, 2023, at Morrow Lake State Park, which is only a 15-minute drive from their house. The 6,250-acre park is named for Morrow Lake and is located 70 kilometers north of Albany, New York. It is a well-liked recreational destination with boating and fishing opportunities, a sandy beach, 158 picnic areas, walking trails, and amazing dense forested areas. Its easy access to other resort towns draws tourists from all over the state. David and Tricia Senna, Charlotte's parents, made the decision to unwind with a sizable gathering here. Charlotte and her friends went cycling around lunchtime. She was about to head back to the camping area after a few rounds when she promised her friends that she would complete one more lap alone before joining the others. The time was around 6:15 p.m. back then. Her parents, however, became aware of her absence 10 minutes later. Other park visitors quickly joined them as they started looking for her and addressing her by name. To assist in finding the child, people got up from their tables and left their food. The area where she vanished became chaotic. They eventually located her daughter's bicycle at 6:45 p.m. That was the beginning of every parent's worst nightmare. The parents had already called the police at 6:47 p.m. They were appalled that they had already lost 30 minutes and were positive that Charlotte had been kidnapped. How were the girl's parents made aware of her abduction? They got a clue from her bicycle. Charlotte wasn't the type to just up and start walking instead of riding her bike. She could ride with the breeze, so why would she get off? If the bike had malfunctioned, things would have been different, but it was in perfect operating order. Besides, it was standing on its kickstand, not lying on the path. In other words, something, or probably someone, managed to attract the girl's attention, stop her, and then kidnap her. Police officers reached the park by 7 p.m. There were definitely severe worries about Charlotte's safety, because the bicycle was located, but she was nowhere to be found. But the police could not rule out the possibility that the child had just lost their way. As a result, both directions were pursued. Information regarding the missing child was quickly disseminated by the media. Numerous individuals looked for her, but as night fell, the situation deteriorated. Over 100 people had already begun searching the park by Sunday, and another 300 joined them the next day. They looked through a number of phones near the park. Luckily, visitors had to register and pay an entrance fee, which allowed the police to interview everyone who had come to the park for recreation. But this took time, and when the officers searched diligently and failed to locate the girl nearby, they began to suspect that she had been kidnapped. Furthermore, Charlotte's scent trail was lost nearly at the same location as her bicycle. If it was a kidnapping, the kidnapper probably had a car, took the girl inside, and drove off. As a result, the stakes were much higher. The likelihood of finding the kid alive drastically decreased just 3 hours after the kidnapping. This is due to the fact that most of the time a criminal views the victim as an object to satiate their personal desires rather than as a child. The victim becomes a witness, evidence of their crime that must be removed. Once they have accomplished their objective, of course, this discussion is about a situation in which the abductor is an unrelated individual who targets the victim, not about a parent kidnapping a child because of a custody dispute. The police put an officer at Charlotte's family's home immediately after she vanished. As David and Tricia Senna, Charlotte's parents, were still looking for their daughter in the park on October 1st, very early in the morning, even before dawn, a car pulled up close to their home. At 4:20 a.m., the policeman observed an unidentified man placing something in the family's mailbox. The man hurriedly got into the car and drove away as the officer started to approach him. Despite noting the car's model, the officer was unable to apprehend him. The police were shocked to discover a ransom note in the mailbox. For Charlotte, the man demanded $50,000. He allegedly made her write the note by force. For failing to stop the stranger, the officer was criticized. It was a chance to save the child and apprehend the kidnapper. Although he witnessed the man leaving the letter, the officer was unable to determine what the man had left in the mailbox. Many people send the parents cards, flowers, and letters of support after learning about a child's disappearance. But this note proved to be very important in saving Charlotte's life. The kidnapper must have arrived so early because he thought no one would be home and no one would notice him. However, he left a crucial hint. The case made an unexpected breakthrough at 2:30 p.m. on Monday, October 2. A fingerprint was discovered on the note by forensic specialists. They found a match after running the fingerprint through the database. Craig Ross, who was previously charged with driving under the influence in Saratoga Springs in 1999, owned it. Craig was among the people in the park when Charlotte was kidnapped, and his phone ping matched theirs. Additionally, a car registered to Craig was tracked by the police back to his mother's house in Bolton Spa, New York. Craig lived behind his mother's house in a tiny motorhome. DNA frequently plays a big part in cases like this, but in this instance, the letter contained an old fingerprint that was found to match a prior drunk driving case. Given the fingerprint, DNA would undoubtedly be present on the note, but fingerprint comparison is 1,000 times quicker. 2:30 p.m. was when the match was found. The FBI and police had already encircled Craig's home by 6:30 p.m. When a child's life was on the line, they didn't need a warrant. Craig's neighbors said they never expected to see something like that, and that the suspect's capture was more akin to a crime thriller. Approximately 6 p.m., about 200 meters from their home on Monday, Charlene and her 11-year-old daughter Bella spotted a number of police officers. Around 6 p.m., a neighbor of Craig's reported that she saw 2 cars stop on her lawn and went outside to eject the rude drivers. Then, out of the cars came police officers fully armed and wearing bulletproof vests. At least 15 police and apprehension team vehicles gathered close to Craig's residence. Armed with weapons and flash grenades, at least 30 officers in full uniform poured out of them and went into action right away. The neighbors at the time found it incomprehensible that their neighbor was detaining the missing girl against her will. But when they saw a convoy of police and FBI cars close to their homes, an ambulance and a helicopter hovering overhead, all of their doubts were dispelled. When the suspect was apprehended, the neighbors were afraid he would rush them and kidnap them and their kids. However, the officers took prompt action and prevented the situation from getting out of hand. Craig was taken into custody after 20 members of the apprehension team barged into the house. During the arrest, he resisted and was slightly hurt. The man was only wearing his underwear when they caught him. It was difficult to find the girl. She was also covered and concealed in the man's bedroom in a tiny closet. Charlotte realized right away that the officers were there to save her. When she realized that everything would be all right and that she would soon be seeing her parents and sisters, it was an extremely emotional moment. The girl was wearing a sweatshirt that was too big on her, which is interesting. One can only be thankful that Craig's motivation was financial, given that he was wearing his underwear and the girl was wearing a sweatshirt. Even though he had complete control over her, he could have done anything he wanted with the girl, and the rescue effort would not have ended as happily. The authorities notified Charlotte's parents that their daughter had been saved, was alive and unharmed at 6:32 p.m. According to Craig's neighbor, she saw Charlotte's face and exclaimed, "It's her! She's there!" as she watched Charlotte being loaded into the ambulance. The woman acknowledged that until her mother showed up and reassured her daughter that Charlotte was safe, she longed to embrace and hold her. Over the course of these few days, the girl became like family to everyone who had been worried about her. Everyone, including the police officers, prayed for her and hoped she would return home safely. As everyone saw the successful operation to free kidnapped Charlotte, they all exhaled, celebrated, gave each other pats on the back, and congratulated one another. The police officers' discovery of the potential kidnapper was a startling moment. Their two objectives when they stormed the house were to capture the kidnapper and save Charlotte's life. In this instance, things turned out better than anyone could have imagined. The criminal has been apprehended and the girl is safe and unharmed. But what if money hadn't been his motivation? It would have been too late by the time they recognized him. The mere thought of it is terrifying. Charlotte was taken to the hospital right away, and following a medical examination, her family was allowed to return home. Charlotte is in excellent health, aside from the evident shock following the kidnapping. She will still have to respond to inquiries regarding the kidnapping and her experiences during her captivity, so it's not quite over for her. To prevent Charlotte from experiencing more trauma, investigators will enlist experts who are trained in communicating with young victims. A significant development in the 3-day search for the girl was revealed to the media at a press conference on October 2. Craig, 47, faced first-degree kidnapping charges on October 3, the very next day. He had previously dealt with the police. First of all, he was arrested for driving while intoxicated in 1,999. His fingerprints were taken at that time and added to the police database, allowing the authorities to connect him to Charlotte's kidnapping. After he was arrested for second-degree stalking in 2016, his girlfriend sought a restraining order against him a year later, after he tried to strangle her by grabbing her by the neck. The police were looking into his involvement in violence against his 12-year-old relative just 1 month prior to Charlotte's abduction, but the case was closed. According to reports, the man, who has multiple sclerosis, moved into a trailer on his mother's property. Due to missed payments, his condition became so bad that he was unable to stay in his previous home in Porter's Corners, New York. Craig has an 11-year-old daughter and 2 grown children. He is characterized by his neighbors as a reclusive individual. They did, however, occasionally catch him working in his home's yard and interacting with his daughter, who is 11 years old and lives with him most days of the week. In reference to the man's older children, Craig's son said he doesn't want to get involved with his father, doesn't want to hear anything about him, and finds his behavior disgusting. Craig is currently detained without the possibility of bail on a first-degree kidnapping charge. He will be represented in court by a free attorney who has been given to him. Although the motive for the kidnapping is not officially stated, based on the ransom note, it is reasonable to assume that money was a major factor, even though the police are not very forthcoming with information. Craig's former girlfriend, Amanda Priest, had a lot to say. According to her, Craig hated his job and was constantly looking for people he could trust to help him. Amanda is certain that money was the driving force, but it's interesting to note that Craig appeared to have targeted Charlotte in particular, rather than just any child. The problem stems from an incident in which Patrick Senna, Charlotte's grandfather, sued Greenfield after a sledding accident in 1998. The $2 million settlement he received was well known among Saratoga's citizens. Given this knowledge, Craig may have been monitoring the family to learn more about their residence, regular locations, and other details. This is exactly why Craig kidnapped the man's granddaughter and demanded a ransom, Amanda claims, in an attempt to obtain funds to help him out financially. Amanda also mentioned that Craig had covered his trailer's windows with tarps not long ago. She is certain that everything was carefully planned as a result. He kept an eye on the family, observed them, was aware of Charlotte's routine, probably followed them from their house to the park, and waited for a chance to see the girl by herself. Investigators are looking into whether the suspect in Charlotte Senna's case is connected to any other crimes, such as the kidnapping and killing of 18-year-old Jennifer Hammond and 19-year-old Christina White. As is customary, investigators are looking into his involvement in any significant incidents in the area, even though there is currently no evidence connecting him to these cases, since their disappearances in 2003 and 2005 respectively, from Milton, the same town where Craig spent decades. The cases of Jennifer and Christina, whom investigators believe to be connected, have remained unsolved. On November 2, 2003, Jennifer went missing according to her boss. No one saw her after co-workers dropped her off at the Creek and Pines trailer park, where she was supposed to sell magazines. Later, all of the girl's possessions were discovered in an Albany hotel room where she was lodging with co-workers. After Christina's family last saw her in the evening on June 30, 2005, 2 years later her disappearance came to light. 5 kilometers from her home, witnesses reported to investigators that they saw her strolling down a road. In March 2006, hunters discovered Christina's remains, which were essentially just a skeleton, 16 kilometers from her last known location in the D-Town forest in Greenfield. According to the autopsy, Christina's chest and abdomen were fatally struck by the murderer. In October 2009, Jennifer's remains were discovered a few kilometers away. Although the cause of her death is unknown, investigators concluded that considering the location of their kidnapping and the location of their bodies, the girls were most likely murdered by the same individual. According to criminal profiler John Kelly, who was familiar with the area and probably liked red-hamed girls, Craig Ross presumably abducted Charlotte, but we know that the best predictor of present or future behavior is past behavior. Therefore, it's always important to find out if a person has committed abductions in the past. There may be a connection because Craig's path from the park to his house apparently goes through wooded areas connected to these 2 unsolved murders. He was keeping an eye on the family and may have believed he could kidnap them again because he had done it successfully in the past. However, he could demand ransom and simultaneously improve his financial situation rather than committing murder. In any event, the inquiry is still ongoing to determine whether he is connected to any other crimes. He has been questioned by the police in the interim to determine whether he was keeping an eye on Charlotte and whether his motivations extended beyond his need for money. The Senna family thanked everyone who put in so much effort to bring their daughter home. Naturally, they expressed their relief at Charlotte's return home and recognize how lucky they are that things turned out this way. They are aware that not all kidnapped children make it back home safely. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Many people can get to the point where they suspect a loved one of betraying them. Others may give in to the influence of fantasies of retaliation against the betrayer, while others may decide to end the relationship due to such suspicions. However, what if a katana were to make these fantasies come true? The setting for this story was Camas, Washington, in 2018. The topic of discussion was a woman who lived in a nice home in a quiet neighborhood. Alex Lovell was the man's name. For 29-year-old Alex, playing video games was his main passion. He was in front of the computer for about 12 or 13 hours every day. Alex took his pastimes so seriously that he routinely performed shoulder, wrist, and hand exercises. He even worked on a unique mouse control method to improve his efficiency as a gamer or player. At the age of 30, Alex's girlfriend Emily Javier was not pleased with his obsession. After 2 years of dating, the young couple noticed that Alex was spending more and more time playing games and having less time for her. Emily, of course, did not like this situation. When Alex made the decision to pursue a career in professional gaming, her patience reached a breaking point. Emily struggled to accept a gaming rival, even though she was somewhat comfortable sharing her boyfriend's gaming habits. When she found the Tinder dating app on Alex's phone, her resentment reached new heights. She became very suspicious of this. She therefore realized that Alex had found another girl when she saw red hairs in the shower and scratches on his back, even though her hair was then dyed green. Convinced that he would simply deny everything, Emily started to plot a retaliation that would enable her to permanently get rid of him, rather than confronting him head-on. She considered purchasing poison, getting a gun, or hiring a killer. No, she purchased a katana at a shopping center. That was the only thing she could think of right now, driven by anger. She therefore made the decision to give herself an additional week to polish her strategy. She entered the question, how to kill someone with a sword, into a search engine while she was at home with the katana. Not surprisingly, her question was answered in a rather direct manner. In order to start their last journey to the Hawaiian Islands with Alex, the girl bought plane tickets at the same time. She confessed that she was tired of life in 2 notes, one to her mother and the other to a close friend. She also wrote Alex a note, though it's unclear what it said and when he was meant to read it. At first, it seemed as though she wanted to do something to herself while on vacation. However, how did she intend to exact revenge on Alex? Kill him too? It's feasible, particularly considering that she could have brought the sword with her if she had checked it in with her bags, rather than bringing it on her person. One evening, though, Alex came home at about 9. He wanted to go to bed and hardly gave his girlfriend any attention. Emily became emotionally unstable as a result of this. She taped 2 additional knives to her side of the bed in case her sword plan didn't work, and she concealed the katana there because she felt she could no longer stand such treatment. She went back to her boyfriend after completing her preparations and offered him a drink to help him fall asleep more quickly while intoxicated. Emily hid the man's phone, which he would need to call for assistance after he fell asleep quickly. She illuminated his neck with the light from her own phone so she could see better and aim more precisely. Her hand went to the katana, but just as she was about to attack, she unintentionally struck Alex in the head with the katana's back, waking him up. An adrenaline rush helped Alex quickly regain his sense of direction and start using his hands and feet to block Emily's next blows. At last, he was able to hold her tightly. He exclaimed in his final moments that he loved her and was shocked that she was attempting to murder him. Alex was on the verge of fainting and begged her to call for assistance or he would perish. Emily, oddly enough, listened. A dispatcher received a call from a girl who was hysterical at 1:54 a.m. on March 3rd. She was yelling that her boyfriend had been hurt. When she inquired as to where the girl had hurt her boyfriend, Emily exclaimed, "Everywhere! Everywhere!" The dispatcher wanted to know where the knife was. The girl responded, shocked, that she had used a samurai sword to attack her boyfriend. The dispatcher advised her to bandage her boyfriend's wounds and asked her to go back to the bedroom where he was to see if he was still breathing. Emily, however, insisted that she couldn't go there because there was too much blood. She snapped back to reality and saw that her boyfriend was actually dying. She even considered the possibility that he was already dead. Officers soon showed up on the scene. Alex was curled up, covered in blood when they entered the bedroom. He had deep gashes on the left side of his head, neck, and torso, among other potentially fatal injuries. Emily had nearly severed 3 fingers on his hand, cut his legs, and broken his wrist. Emily was taken into custody without protest and with tears in her eyes. While Alex was taken to the hospital, she let the legal system take care of her. A $350,000 bail was set for her. Alex's body had 26 wounds, according to the doctors. 6 major surgeries were required for him. 45 of the 150 staples they applied to him were on his head alone. However, the medical staff miraculously succeeded in reattaching his fingers. He would undoubtedly need to see a physical therapist for a while, but the fact that he lived was more significant. Because of Emily's weapon choice, the ferocity with which she executed the attack, and Alex's incredible fortitude, this attack garnered a lot of attention in the US and made headlines in numerous media outlets. Even though he had a long recovery ahead of him, he maintained an exceptionally optimistic outlook. He amusingly posted a question on the internet a day after the attack, asking if anyone could split a picture of him and Emily together. Some of his remarks were repeated by the media, though it's unclear how he was able to take the attack so lightly. One example would be, "I'm really proud that I was beaten with a sword and by a girl, man. I must sacrifice it for her. I certainly took a lesson from this. There's no comparing the feeling of when I overpowered her," he continues. "I've participated in sports, taken first place in major competitions, and more. I've performed snowboard tricks. This is superior. I believed it was right to defeat someone who was determined to do me harm. I had spent my entire life anticipating this." Alex credits his love of kung fu movies and his habit of competing against other gamers with helping him win. He says he never cheated on Emily, but acknowledges that he likely spent too much time in front of the monitor. He remarked, "I hardly had time for one girl, much less another. He simply was too worn out to give her the affection she so richly deserved." Tinder was on his phone, he clarified, but he hadn't used it since it became apparent that he and Emily were seriously dating. Alex even acknowledged that the exhaustion from playing video games all day was the reason for his low libido. This might have persuaded Emily that he no longer wanted her, but he says that numerous times before, even when another girl merely liked his picture on social media, she had falsely accused him of cheating. All of this is denied by Emily. Regarding the red hairs, they might have come from his dog's fur or his own beard. Emily found it challenging to defend herself in court. Everyone could see that this was a carefully considered and planned crime. Emily told police that she wanted to kill him for cheating. "That was my objective." She was convicted of attempting first-degree murder. Her sentence was lowered from a potential 20-year term to 19 years because of Alex's survival, her lack of prior convictions, and her own decision to call 911 for assistance. This result did not sit well with Alex's family. They felt that because she tried to kill their son, she should be punished more severely. Emily countered that because of her history of childhood trauma, which hindered her ability to form relationships, her sentence should be shortened. Although her psychologist acknowledged that she had PTSD, he said it had no bearing on the case. The judge ultimately decided that she should receive almost the maximum sentence because of the severity of the attack. She must also receive treatment for her aggression and mental health issues. She must pay $30,000 in reparations and is forbidden from getting in touch with Alex or his family. To help Alex recover, his gaming friends set up a crowdfunding page and raised thousands of dollars. He is presently recuperating and has largely resumed his regular activities. He says he hasn't spoken to Emily since the attack. When asked how he feels about her, he admits that she saved his life by calling 911, which is significant. But it's difficult to sum up his feelings for his ex-girlfriend in just 2 words. In any case, he thinks she needs significant assistance. "I didn't expect this, but something like this had to happen," he continues in his characteristically lighthearted tone. "She reached for the samurai sword because she obviously didn't want me to end up in the wrong hands." And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The frequency with which people are buried alive in movies makes you unconsciously believe that this never occurs in real life. Regretfully, incidents like this do happen, and the best evidence of this is a story that happened in Huddersfield, UK 10 years ago. Marcin and Michalina fell in love right away. When their feelings waned, however, Michalina insisted that it was time for her to move abroad and begin a new life. Marcin, though, would sooner kill her than let it happen. Not all people separate like well-mannered adults do. Some people think they can literally bury all of their problems in the ground. Here, 19-year-old Marcin Kaspak and 21-year-old Michalina Lewandowski first crossed paths in their home country of Poland in 2005. A year later, Marcin asked Michalina to marry him, and the two of them relocated to the UK to begin a new life together. But things soured between them in 2008 after Michalina found out she was expecting a child. They canceled their engagement, but they still lived together in Marcine's parents' home. Michalina wore her engagement ring even after the engagement ended because she still loved Marcine and hoped they could resolve their differences. That was not meant to be, unfortunately. By 2011, Marcin's lack of interest in making amends with Michalina was clear. In an effort to stay away from her, he trained 5 times a week at the gym and spent nearly all of his free time there. Unexpectedly, however, Marcin asked Michalina to accompany him and his friend, 18-year-old Patrick Boris, on a shopping trip on Saturday, May 28, 2011. Michalina was taken aback because Marcin didn't often show an interest in hanging out with her. Still, she was relieved and hoped that things would get better now. The girl quickly went to the restroom to apply makeup. Jakub, their 3-year-old son, was fortunately with his grandmother, Marcine's mother, on that particular day, and was not present when the events transpired. Upon exiting the restroom, Michalina noticed Patrick and Marcin gazing at her with a horrifying smile on their lips. Taking Michalina's hand, Marcin said, "I want to show you something." Then he took a 300,000-volt stun gun out of his pocket, put it to her neck, and pressed the trigger. The agony swept through Michalina's body as she collapsed to the ground. Bodybuilder Marcin, who weighed 101 kg, saw her convulse from the electric shock while kneeling on her chest and holding her down on the ground. Momentarily regaining consciousness, Michalina asked Marcin if he meant to murder her, to which he replied that she should not be afraid, as he would simply take her somewhere. Patrick was then told to get some packing tape. The men taped Michalina's mouth shut, gagged her, and then tied her wrists and ankles. They shocked her with electricity once more before abandoning her, frightened and bound. Even though she initially believed it to be a mean joke, she was now certain of their true motivations. She was immobile and worried about fainting, not knowing if she would ever regain consciousness. Michalina was hauled into the kitchen and crammed into a cardboard box by Marcin and Patrick a few hours later. One day, they brought up a plastic bag. Marcin started to tape the box shut, but she thought they were going to put it over her head to suffocate her. The girl struggled to scream as she lost what little peace she still had. Then Marcin got on his knees, chuckled, and declared, "I've been hating you for 4 years. Your son will never be seen again." His uncanny composure on his face was more terrifying than the hateful words he spoke in this scene. The cardboard box was sealed. Then the men picked it up from both sides, carried it to Patrick's car, and put it in the trunk. The girl knew they had gone far before Patrick and Marcin took the box away. Michalina felt her back being scratched by the stones as the men pulled her along the ground. The fact that Marcin and Patrick had taken her to a wooded area close to Huddersfield was hidden from her inside the box. After digging a shallow grave beforehand, they buried the box containing Michalina inside. Michalina was lying in the box, still in excruciating pain and terrified, when she heard the men hurling dirt onto her grave. The box itself was dark and extremely small. In an attempt to keep from passing out, Michalina began breathing as shallowly as she could, because she was certain she would suffocate. In an effort to determine whether the car had moved on so she could start to flee, she strained her hearing. That Marcin would hit her with a shovel if they were still around when she tried to escape was no longer a possibility. Even though Michalina was unable to hear a car leaving, she eventually made the decision to take action, whether or not they were in the area. She made an effort to maintain her composure despite the thousands of ideas racing through her mind. She would later admit that she kept going because she was thinking about her little boy, Jakub. She would never see him again if she passed away, and he would be left motherless. She could not let that occur. Looking down at her restrained wrists, Michalina realized she had her diamond engagement ring, which she could use to break free. Michalina was able to sever the tape that bound her mouth, hands, and feet with the ring's sharp edges. She started scratching at the box's cardboard after that. After some time, she managed to make a tiny hole in the cardboard, which she discovered was a little damp, perhaps from the wet dirt that had been piled on top of it. Through the gap, Michalina stuck her fingers out and ripped the box apart. She only felt dirt, though, the same dirt that had been thrown on her grave by her boyfriend. She was still unaware at the time that, In addition to the meter-deep layer of dirt they had buried her beneath, they had also positioned a 40-kilogram log on top to make sure she couldn't get out. As more and more dirt soaked into the box, it covered her clothes, hair, and face. Michelena cried out for assistance, but no one was there to hear her. Her body shook with pain, and she grew weary, but she knew that continuing on was essential if she hoped to see her son again. "Don't give up," she said to herself again. Simply, don't give up. Michelena persisted in pushing, tearing, and pounding at the cardboard box until she managed to reach out her whole hand and raise her head above the floor. She breathed in the fresh air with anticipation. She could see the sky above her head, the trees, and the leaves, even though it was dark. Even though Michelena was completely covered in dirt and had lost all her strength, she no longer had any doubts about her ability to get away. Finally, she was able to pull herself up and claw her way out from under the ground with one last effort. After being in the box for an hour, Michelena miraculously emerged from her grave. In addition to surviving, she saved herself by using the diamond engagement ring that her would-be murderer had given her. Running toward the road from the woods, Michelena signaled a passing vehicle. That the driver didn't run away in fear when he saw a weak, dirt-covered woman come out onto the road was a great blessing for her. He listened to her and then stopped to call the police to find out what had happened. Michelena showed the police the cardboard box where she had been left to suffer her last moments in horrifying pain when they arrived at the crime scene 15 minutes later. Without a doubt, Marcin had never been more terrified in his life than he was when the police knocked on his door and told him he was being taken into custody on charges of attempted murder and kidnapping. He resisted for a long time, claiming that his intention was not to kill Michelena, but simply to frighten her. But no one took this defense seriously, so it didn't do him much good. After leaving Michelena to die, the men took PS500 from an ATM using her bank card, went home, and began playing video games, as the police quickly learned. In fact, Marcin was not planning to return for Michelena. His idea was completely different. Marcin, 25, was a dedicated bodybuilder who had become dependent on anabolic steroids, which led to his frequent outbursts. He concluded that it would be best for his son to grow up without a mother at all. After learning that Michelena had decided to leave the fight for their relationship and was going to return to Poland with Jakub, Michelena would not be able to raise his grandson as well as his own mother. With the intention of killing his ex-fiancée, he came up with one of the most horrific ways to end her life. Marcin was given a 20-year prison term after being found guilty of attempted murder and kidnapping in January 2012. Although Patrick was convicted of kidnapping, he was not found guilty of attempted murder. He received a 4.5-year sentence in a juvenile detention center. Both men were not eligible for parole until they had completed half of their sentences. Marcin won't, however, be available for purchase anytime soon. The police searched his parents' home, where he lived with Michelena and their son after he was arrested. The house contained a variety of chemicals and instructions for making explosives, according to the police. Consequently, Marcin received 8 more 4-year sentences for the explosives, while already serving his sentence for attempted murder. I prevented him from achieving his goal of killing me in the most horrific manner possible, even though he wished for my demise. I battled my way out of that grave with the last of my strength. Following the delivery of the guilty verdict, Michelena remarked, "Now it is he who is imprisoned." Even after learning that her ex-lover had received a 20-year sentence, Michelena is still terrified. Despite having moved to a different home far from Huddersfield with her son, whose address is kept secret for their safety, Michelena acknowledged following the trial that she still has nightmares about what she endured. "I was buried alive and trapped in that shallow grave, and I was afraid that my life was over and that I would pass away. In order to survive and care for my young son, I prayed to God. I had the courage to leave that box and flee when I thought of my son. I had a deep affection for Marcin Kasbach for many years, but after the terrible attack on me, my affections for him deteriorated into hatred. I still have nightmares about Marcin returning, finding me, and killing me. I'm hoping he understands how wrong what he did to me was. The difficulties I faced that day, at the hands of a man I trusted and loved, are something I hope no one else will ever have to go through." And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, What part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. It was a very pleasant evening for the Solis family on Friday, April 20, 2012. Their 6-year-old sister, young Isabel, was present at a baseball game between Rebecca and Sergio's 2 sons. The family went home after the game, which lasted until 10 o'clock. Rebecca braided the girl's hair to save time before work the following morning, when she was scheduled to play baseball. After saying goodnight to his daughter, Sergio departed at 11 o'clock. Isabel frequently slept in her brother's room, even though she had her own bedroom. This night, however, she remained by herself. Becky and the boys soon fell asleep, and Sergio dozed off on the couch as he watched a baseball game that he had previously recorded. The man woke up at 5 and walked slowly to the bedroom. When he went to sleep beside his wife, the house was calm and quiet. Rebecca left for work at the medical center 2 hours later. The woman heard nothing and saw nothing out of the ordinary in the house. She left for work without visiting her daughter's room. Isabel wasn't in her bed when Sergio went to get her up for the game at about 8 in the morning. No one answered when he asked his sons if they had seen their sister. He called for Isabel and searched the house with the boys, but she didn't answer. Then, at the age of 14, Sergio Jr. saw that his sister's room had an open window and that the protective screen was on the ground in the yard. While Rebecca was hurrying home and the sons were desperately looking around the neighborhood for their younger sister, Sergio called his wife. Sergio dialed the emergency number. This was the call that ultimately led to a great deal of controversy and backlash against him. Sergio was remarkably composed throughout the call, despite the fact that people react differently when under stress or panic. In addition to his composure, many found it odd that he announced his daughter's kidnapping right away. The idea of telling his wife to come home even made him laugh. Sergio clarified that he was only attempting to maintain composure so that he could give the police all the information they required. It's interesting to note that Sergio Jr.'s neighbor also dialed 911. He was obviously upset and trembling, unlike his father, but he also said right away that his sister had been abducted and that they would not be able to locate her. Rebecca, who had also been in a state of panic and despair upon arriving at her house, was then given the phone. She was able to provide a detailed account of the attire her daughter was wearing prior to going missing. In fact, the girl's bedroom window had a protective screen on the ground in the yard when the officers arrived. It had a big hole in it, like it had been made with a tool. Soft toys that were always lying in the room beneath the girl's window were now strewn about. Isabel's shoe prints, which were found on the electrical box beneath the family's high fence and on the alley behind the house, were found on the floor next to blood. When he kidnapped the girl, the criminal most likely climbed over it. The police conducted extensive door-to-door searches, dismissing the possibility that the 6-year-old girl had escaped because they thought the case was one of kidnapping. Around 6:30 a.m., Alicia Stardevant, the Solis family's neighbor, reported being awakened by a noise. The girl's room is right across the fence from her bedroom. Alicia claimed to have heard the barking of the Solis family's dogs as well as her own. She heard men's voices outside of them, as if they were coming from her side of the fence rather than the Solis family's house. However, she ignored the fact that it was already becoming light outside and went back to sleep. The men didn't whisper or lower their voices, according to Alicia, and she didn't even consider the possibility that there was a small child present. Only locals were permitted to pass through the checkpoint that the police had set up around the Solis family's home. Since children are typically killed within 100 meters of the scene of the kidnapping, the search initially concentrated on a small area surrounding the house. After that, they interviewed residents and broadened the search area to include multiple apartment complexes. Officers used underwater cameras and sonars to examine the lakes and ponds, the local garbage dump, and the stadium where Isabel's baseball game was scheduled to take place. The Solis family's house was searched by forensic specialists and search dogs, and border guards handed out pictures of Isabel. There is a significant likelihood that children who disappear in Arizona wind up on the Mexican border. Furthermore, 16 criminals who had harmed women and children resided close to the family's residence in 2012. At the time, they were all questioned and turned away. There was a theory that someone had followed the family after spotting Isabel playing with her brothers in the evening and kidnapped the girl from the house at night. Officers followed this lead by looking up the registration numbers of every vehicle in the parking lot. The family's home was close to surveillance cameras, which revealed an exceptionally bustling nightlife. A car belonging to a private security firm pulled up in the alleyway close to the house at 2:36 a.m. 10 minutes later, 2 more cars were spotted in the parking lot. All of a sudden, there were a lot of people walking around the house, some of them curious about the trash cans. A car sped around the corner next to the trash can an hour before the 911 call, but during the 10 hours of filming, the girl did not show up anywhere. However, when the police searched the house, they found something intriguing. Inscriptions were discovered by the officers on Isabel's wardrobe doorframe. Rebecca said she was unaware of the inscriptions, which were written in a child's handwriting and contained phrases like "bad father," "I don't love father," and "bad day." Nevertheless, the police chose to thoroughly question Isabel's family. According to one of the sons, their father got violent, cursed, and struck him twice after drinking. Concerned about the Solis sons, investigators invited Child Protection Services staff because, as it turned out, the agency had been called to the family's residence multiple times. One of the boys left a glass in the detergent while doing the dishes in January 2012. Sergio reprimanded his son for his error and drank water from that glass. The boy told his friends about the incident the following day, and someone's parents called Child Protection Services, despite Rebecca's insistence that they laughed about it. In any case, Sergio willingly left the house in May 2012 at their request, despite Rebecca's assertion that her husband was a great father and that all questions would be addressed when Isabel got home. Sergio was able to return home to his wife and sons after the incident was quickly resolved, but the family was disappointed that the investigation produced no findings. The police kept focusing on them, Sergio in particular, even though they were never named as suspects. "It feels like the investigation never went beyond this house," the man later said. "That is the reason it is so distressing." They therefore engaged private investigator Jerry Snyder to look into Isabel's kidnapping objectively, and he suspected Rebecca's cousin Justin Master Mourinho. Initially, Justin spoke to reporters and conducted interviews as a spokesperson for the family. However, 2 weeks after Isabel vanished, he sent his car to Florida, hired the top attorney, and departed without responding to inquiries from the police or media. The private investigator found such behavior odd. Furthermore, Justin still had the key to the house after living there for a long time with the Solis family. According to one version, Justin might owe someone money because he had previously spent the night in Isabel's room. The criminal would come for him, but instead of Justin, they would find Isabel in the room and take her as leverage, or as ransom. Sebastian Hartsfield, a friend of his, is certain that Master Mourinho made the correct decision and would have left as well if he had the money. The problem is that Justin was fed up with the public's and media's invasive attention. Sebastian claimed that he and Justin spent the night of the kidnapping together. He reluctantly acknowledges that he and Justin smoked and drank all evening because it was April 20, National Cannabis Day. Sebastian is certain that his friend is innocent, even though there was a 6-hour lapse while they were sleeping, and he is unsure of Justin's whereabouts. The police chief stated that the investigator the family had hired had no evidence, but the police were certain of Justin's innocence when they finally questioned him. It is noteworthy that Sergio's daughter was abducted for ransom and that he was also suspected of owing money to criminals. Isabel was at the age when family members most frequently kidnap children. Sergio kissed her goodnight at 11 o'clock, the last person to see her after she was abducted from the house where only her family members were present. He failed the polygraph exam. Furthermore, the dog's nighttime barking serves as an indirect indication that a family member was involved. How could an outsider be aware of the girl's room location, the fact that she wouldn't be sleeping in her brother's bedroom, and the fact that her room would be dog-free? Her bedroom was usually where at least one of them slept. How could the kidnapper have known exactly how to get past the street security cameras? However, aside from suspicion, neither Justin nor Sergio were connected to the crime. Isabel was where? Rewind to the morning of July 23, 2012, when 3 distress calls were received by the rescue service. A young girl called to report that she had been kidnapped. "He's coming," she said, mentioning Isabel's name and identifying the district in which she was located, before the call ended. The officers searched the designated district but were unable to locate anyone. Two sisters, ages 9 and 11, lived in the apartment complex where they traced the call. The sisters had just chosen to pull a practical joke. Despite the commotion, the calls were promptly released. However, the city had to pay $4,700 in officers' wages for the search in the district the girls had designated because of their joke. The police made multiple attempts to raise awareness of the case after this incident, such as posting a picture of Isabel's potential appearance years later. However, the case remained unresolved for years in spite of all efforts. Who took Isabel hostage? Was she taken by someone the family didn't know who came in through a window? Did Justin think about kidnapping Isabel in order to demand a ransom because he was in debt, but the kidnapping didn't work out? Are their relatives hiding what happened to her? And was one of her brothers complicit? Or is the biological father of Isabel more knowledgeable than he claims to be? Unexpectedly, the case made a breakthrough on February 8, 2017. Melissa called the FBI and said they should talk to her fiancé, Christopher Clements, regarding Isabel's disappearance. They should speak with him because, allegedly, he might know something about the girl's disappearance. But Melissa was unable to elaborate. It was easy to find Christopher because he was incarcerated on robbery charges. Christopher assured the agents that he was aware of Isabel's location, but he insisted on a bargain in return for information on her whereabouts. In Isabel's case, he demanded complete immunity, the dismissal of his charges, and the return of his seized Acura Honda. He reassured them that only he and a member of the Solis family are aware of the girl's fate. He made hints that Sergio was aware of and complicit in his daughter's kidnapping. Christopher informed them that at a nearby pawn shop, Sergio was observed giving Mexican gold coins to a customer. After an alleged altercation, Isabel was taken to collect the money her father owed for the pilfered coins. Regardless of how much the agents probed him, Christopher stayed away from specifics and spoke in general terms. The man refused to back down, a deal in exchange for information. He achieved his goal. After negotiating, the prosecutor's office dropped the robbery charges and gave the car back. On March 3, 2017, the police and FBI discovered Isabel's remains after the man gave them the location. Rebecca and Sergio Solis had to confront the sobering realization that Isabel had permanently departed. Any hopes they had of a joyful reunion were dashed. Christopher Clements did not, however, get the freedom he had hoped for from the agreement. He was instead taken to the Maricopa County Jail, where he was accused of committing another robbery. Full immunity, which Christopher insisted on in Isabel's case, was not provided by the agreement. Investigators started looking into the man's past in greater detail. He committed first-degree violence when he was 16 years old, beginning his criminal career. Ever since, he had been in trouble on several occasions. The man's ex-wife claimed that Christopher was compelled to sleep in the car until they left, frequently brought girls home from strip clubs, and was obsessed with adult films. He was employed at a shopping mall just 2 kilometers from Isabel's residence when she vanished. Detectives definitely looked into Sergio's relationship to the local pawn shop that Christopher had mentioned. 2 months prior to Isabel's kidnapping, they learned that 21 gold coins had been taken from a woman's home, and they assumed Christopher was the thief. Hours after the theft, he was seen on the security camera entering the pawn shop, delivering the items, and taking the cash. Sergio's involvement or any connection to the case was not implied in the video. Christopher was probably merely researching the charges against Sergio that were reported in the media and speaking with agents in an attempt to discredit the girl's father. A search warrant for the home where Christopher and his fiancée Melissa previously resided was among the many that the police were issued. Investigators discovered a sheet of plywood in one corner of the yard, beneath which was a plastic container filled with ashes and a number of gory finds, such as a faded, lilac child's hooded hoodie and a very young child's school assignment with the name Mercedes on it. She was Isabel Mercedes Solis in full. On Christopher's devices, they also discovered explicit images of girls between the ages of 3 and 13. His computer was searched for Isabel Solis, unsolved cases in Arizona, and child killer acquitted. According to a former acquaintance, Christopher discussed the Isabel case and hinted that there might be evidence in his car's trunk. Thus, its return was essential. The vehicle, a Honda Acura, was reportedly given back to the man in return for details regarding Isabel's location. Although Isabel's cause of death is still unknown, The same acquaintance claims that she was suffocated and that chemicals were poured over her body. The man recalled that Christopher had concealed pictures of the Solace house in a Bible in his room and showed them to him. In addition to obtaining a warrant for this Bible, investigators did discover images of the house. After 2 months, the Tucson police chief declared that they had a suspect, Christopher Clements, 36, who was accused of 2 murders. The problem is that when Christopher told 2 agents on March 3, 2017, where they would find Isabel, he pointed out a crucial marker, a stack of tires that obviously did not appear there in a single day. The agents were immediately alarmed by this instruction, because the police had discovered the body of a teenage girl from Tucson near that same tire pile a few years prior. Maribel Gonzalez was the girl's name. Isabel had been missing for 2 years when a rescue service dispatcher received a terrifying call in June 2014. A woman reported seeing a body by the side of the road. When the police arrived on the scene, they discovered a naked body buried beneath the tire pile, the smell of decay and evidence that someone had been dragged on the ground. The place was a long way from the closest residences. In an attempt to identify the girl, the police sent a picture of the tattoo on her collarbone and a chain with an anchor that she was wearing to the media. In fact, a number of people reported that it was 13-year-old Maribel Gonzalez to the police. According to Maribel's relatives, she was seeing Mariano, a man in his 20s. A month before Maribel vanished, they ended their 3-year relationship. Around 11 or 12 p.m., Mariano told the police she sent him a message. She had a fight with her mother the day she vanished, so she asked him to come get her. He had to get up early for work, so he disregarded her message. She was never seen by him again. Even at night, she enjoyed taking solitary walks, according to her boyfriend. She also enjoyed visiting the mall, which is the same one where Christopher Clements worked and is close to Isabel's house. Because the bodies were discovered close to one another, the police were able to connect these cases. Maribel's DNA and Christopher's DNA were compared, and they matched. 2 years prior to Maribel, Isabella was abducted and murdered. Could Maribel's death have been avoided if the offender had been apprehended following the initial crime? As it turns out, Christopher's name was mentioned multiple times during the investigation, prior to his 2018 conversation with the agents. As is already known, the officers got in touch with everyone who lived close to Isabel and committed sexual offenses, which are violent crimes against women and children. Christopher was one of 16 names on the list. He was classified as a Class 3 offender, which means that he has a very high chance of committing the same crime again. He spoke with the police, but he clearly managed to persuade the officer that he was unrelated to the case. Maybe he had an alibi from his girlfriend. In addition, Isabel's parents requested that anyone who might raise suspicions, such as traders, distributors, advertising agents, unannounced visitors, or unexpected meetings, be remembered after Isabel vanished. Rebecca thought of the man who had shown interest in their red Acura right away. Despite his 2 visits, he never entered the house, and the woman was unaware of his name. It's interesting that during the interrogations, Christopher also brought up that encounter. On February 10, 2017, he told FBI agents this. He claimed that 2 individuals feigned interest in the vehicle. Actually, they had to confirm that Sergio actually resided at that address. Rebecca gave them her phone number and insisted that they speak with her husband Sergio about the possibility of purchasing from him. The men thus verified their desire. Christopher claimed that although he was aware of the visit, he had never gone to the Solis residence. However, he repeatedly used the pronoun we rather than they throughout the conversation, seemingly admitting that one of the men was actually him. With one exception, the woman described only one man who fit Christopher's description and drove the same car as him. Her account of the visit deviates slightly from her husband's account, but otherwise, it is consistent with Rebecca's account. What if this lead had been pursued by the police right away after Isabel vanished? Would they have found Christopher Clements as a result? Investigators think Isabel was not abducted on her own initiative. Christopher's crimes were premeditated. When the woman from whom he had stolen gold coins was not home, he called her house several times. As early as October 2011, he also made a call to the Sellers family residence. Christopher washed his car and changed his phone number the day after the kidnapping. He usually pays about $10.35 to have his car cleaned, but this time he paid $110. However, since phone records connected Christopher to 2 crimes, changing his number did not help. The shoes that Christopher was frequently spotted wearing and even photographed in, but which none of the Solis family wore, matched the footprints discovered at the scene of Isabel's abduction. Investigators also examined images on his devices and discovered a small snapshot. It was a selfie of a man who resembled Clements, sitting in the front seat of a car, and a young girl who was lying on the back seat and looked a lot like Isabel. Rebecca and Sergio saw the picture. The woman acknowledged that the girl looked like Isabel, but the poor quality of the picture prevented her from being certain. When Melissa, his fiancée, saw the picture, she started to shake, despite Christopher's claims that the child in it was his son. The child did not seem like her own. The 1.5-year-old boy with the fair hair did not look like the child in the picture. Rather, it resembled a girl with dark hair who had her hair braided, a style that Isabel's mother had adopted shortly before the abduction. The defense contended that Christopher was not carrying his phone when he made those calls. The footprints were first identified as work boots, and the blood in Isabel's bedroom most likely existed prior to the kidnapping. In order to prevent the prosecutor from presenting evidence for both crimes at once, Christopher's attorneys were successful in their efforts to have the Isabel case and the Maribel case tried separately. But since he had already been convicted of Maribel Gonzalez's murder, this did him little good. He is still awaiting trial for Isabel's abduction. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. When a distressed man called the Las Vegas, Nevada Rescue Service on Saturday, April 5, 1997, to report his wife missing, the dispatcher took the call. The man, who was identified as Mark Hollinger, clarified that Ginger Rios was the name of his wife. They had recently moved into a new home the day before and had only been married for 5 months. When Ginger walked into a store and appeared to disappear, they were shopping for a new house. The police started looking into it. Even in a city with its share of sins, detectives had never heard of a disappearance so enigmatic. The unusualness of this case, where you believe you know exactly what happened, but you are wrong and have to start over, was beyond their wildest expectations. Ginger Rios was a 20-year-old Las Vegas resident and worker. Ginger and her younger sister Daniela were beloved daughters of her parents, George and Denise. The girls were surrounded by care and attention as they grew up. Ginger had always wanted to be a performer, and she was lucky to be born in Las Vegas because by the time she was 20, she was a part of a popular group that played in casinos and hotels. Additionally, she met Mark Hollinger, a man who was 14 years her senior. Mark was very kind to Ginger. The young couple quickly made the decision to legalize their relationship after he helped her in every way. They were married in November 1996, when Ginger was just 20 and Mark was 34. Because Mark was a quiet introvert and Ginger was a happy extrovert, some people thought their union was unusual. However, they were already planning how to construct their family nest and were a perfect match. Ginger discovered a fantastic house with a buyout option that was for rent in the spring of 1997. Ginger could already picture converting the house's large basement into a dance studio. She dreamed of eventually buying the house because she liked it so much, but she and Mark needed a good credit history in order to make this dream a reality. Ginger wanted to purchase books that offered pertinent advice because they needed a clear plan for how they would handle their money. In the city, a store that carried the exact books Ginger was looking for was becoming well known. Spy Shop was an odd moniker for it. It resembled an adult candy store. Its bookshelves were stocked with lockpicks, police badges, concealed surveillance cameras, automobile alarms, image transmitting glasses, and even tools for removing store security tags from clothing. It was ideally situated in the heart of the city. The young couple went shopping, including buying books, on Friday, April 4th, which was literally the day after they had moved into their new house. Mark parked right in front of the entrance at about 4 in the afternoon. Ginger took her wallet, which contained some cash and her identification, and went inside after telling her husband to wait in the car. Mark thought she would emerge quickly, but he was able to finish his cigarette and she hadn't shown up yet. He waited a bit longer, thinking she might be in line, and then made the decision to see how his wife was doing. The store was small enough for him to notice Ginger's absence right away. He inquired if the man and woman behind the counter had seen Ginger and gave them a description of her. Naturally, they responded that she had simply entered, purchased 2 books, and departed. She couldn't have gone very far, they added. Despite his surprise, Mark chose to browse other stores in case she needed to buy something else. He entered each one and inquired if anyone had spotted the slim brunette, but nobody had. There were no limits to his awe. She couldn't have just slipped past the car, which was parked directly in front of the entrance. In the middle of the day, Ginger had just vanished. Mark went to his wife's parents because he had run out of options. George, Ginger's father, thought right away that the spy shop would undoubtedly have security cameras if any store had them. After she left the store, they might be able to see at least which way she went. In addition to being notable for its distinctive merchandise, this store closed earlier than other establishments in Vegas. So Mark and George rushed back, praying the storekeeper hadn't already left. Mark was able to identify the man and woman getting into a van with a baby, even though the store was closed. They came over and gave an explanation. The man identified himself as John Flowers and asserted that he was the shop's owner. He clarified that in order to avoid traffic, he and his spouse had already closed the doors and set the alarm because they intended to depart before the weekend. He would be pleased to show them any video on Monday, but they had to move quickly. Despite their extreme frustration, Mark and George didn't want to clog up traffic for a family with a small child. The men went home and decided to call the police in the morning if the young woman wasn't there by nightfall or evening. Mark dialed 911 as soon as the sun came up. After being assigned to the case, Detective Jeff Rosen naturally started his investigation by attempting to find out more about the girl's life prior to her disappearance. She seemed to have a very happy life. She was truly loved by her sister and parents. Her career was booming. She had recently moved into a new house, and she had only been married for 5 months. She didn't seem to have any reason to flee, or did she? Is there something that nobody is aware of? What if she had purchased something else that made her disappear in the store instead of financial books? A few weeks ago, George remembered, his daughter had talked about going to that same store, but he had no recollection of her discussing anything out of the ordinary or buying anything during her visit. Her family came to the conclusion that she had to have been kidnapped in some way, but how could this have happened so quickly without her yelling or phoning for assistance? Did this mean she was acquainted with her kidnapper? The young woman did not take out her most recent paycheck or use her credit cards after she vanished. This implied that her disappearance was probably not voluntary. The detective also talked to the girl's friends and co-workers, who had a very different perspective on Ginger's life. Initially, the girl was not as ecstatic about her career advancement as it may have appeared. She felt that she ought to have pursued a solo career by now, instead of serving as a backup vocalist. Second, some strangers who saw her on stage made persistent advances and even harassed her, which she didn't like. Thirdly, she experienced severe mood swings as a result of having to take weight loss pills. Lastly, she had been living in a hotel for a while in order to avoid going home because her marriage was not going well. Detective Rosen believed Mark was concealing something because he had heard enough, but Mark's tale had remained unchanged. Ginger's parents maintained that it was a waste of time and money to suspect Mark because he had no apparent reason to hurt his wife. However, there were no other leads in the investigation. Only Mark's story had been told. The girl's purchases were verified by the shop owner, of course, but could anyone be certain that Ginger didn't go back to the car before Mark did something to her? Mark fervently hoped his wife had just escaped. At least she was safe, even though it wounded his pride. He even made an effort to carry out his own investigation, interviewing people and looking for Ginger or any leads in the city with George. Mark was Ginger's husband, so on the one hand he loved her and undoubtedly spent every moment he had free looking for her. Detective Rosen, however, interpreted this as an effort to deflect attention away from himself. In fact, Mark's leads were insignificant compared to the police's subsequent lead, which was aimed directly at Mark. Patrol officers discovered what turned out to be Mark's burning car in the parking lot of a nearby shopping center. What did he say about this? He was unaware. He just left the car in the parking lot and took a cab home after work when the engine began to make odd noises. To put it another way, the police had to assume it was a coincidence because the probable crime scene, assuming Mark had actually done anything to Ginger, was on fire. Despite the fact that it would take some time, forensic specialists took the vehicle for examination. The detectives decided to restart the investigation from the location where she was last seen by someone other than her husband because they had spent too much time concentrating on Mark. Although John Flowers, the proprietor of Spy Shop, was not there at the time, one of his staff members gave the police permission to search the area. They went through every room, but they didn't perform a thorough search. When Detective Jeff Rosen entered the storeroom, the overpowering smell of bleach nearly knocked him off his feet, but he didn't find anything odd in the store itself. He saw a small reddish-brown stain on the wall that might have been blood. Just in case, they made the decision to take it for analysis. John Flowers was notified by Rosen that the police had come to his store. Although John was shocked that they hadn't located the girl yet, he was happy to answer all of the questions. He clarified that the reason for the bleach odor in the storeroom was that he had to clean up after his dog using it as a toilet on a regular basis. A small drop of blood might have gotten there that way. He would have to visit the store to locate the security camera footage and the book purchase receipts, then turn them over to the police. When Rosen inquired about the books Ginger had purchased, the surprise was revealed. One book focused on contract killers and the other on establishing a new identity. However, why did Ginger purchase these? Did someone coerce her into purchasing these books and then murder her in one of the ways outlined in the second book? Or did she truly intend to vanish? Though it was too small to analyze, the tiny spot on the wall may have bled. But since everyone already knew Ginger had been in the store and gone, determining her subsequent whereabouts was far more important. Given Ginger's remarkable beauty and public appearances, there were, in fact, a number of potential leads. She could have been seen by a large number of people, including those with malicious intent. In addition, her father was a dealer at one of Vegas's most well-known casinos. Things can get messy when it comes to money. Weeks passed, and there was less and less chance that the girl would be found alive. When the response about Mark's car arrived, guess what? They discovered nothing at all, including no blood or indications of struggle. It was then that Rosen remembered John Flowers. He thought about watching the security camera footage to see if Ginger had been approached at the store's exit, but it was too late for him. "Where have you been all this time, guys?" John exclaimed, explaining that he had watched the video and witnessed Ginger walk into the store, select the books, pay with cash, and walk out. The video had been replaced with fresh footage from the security camera because no one had arrived to watch it. John was also unable to locate the book's receipt, even though he was positive it was somewhere. John appeared reluctant to continue working with the detective after this, in part because of the negative impact that the police, the media, and interested bystanders had on his business following Ginger's disappearance. Although it made sense, selling lockpicks and phony police badges in a store already stocked with law enforcement gear severely strained his small business. Rosen was aware of this, and John had nothing to encourage him to speak with them. The police had no fresh leads, and the case was put on hold. The truth was there, in fact, but it would take several more months for the detectives investigating Ginger's case to realize it. A team of hunters discovered a shallow grave in the Mojave Desert on May 5, almost 400 miles from Las Vegas. The body in the grave was identified by the medical examiner as that of a young, dark-haired girl between the ages of 15 and 18. The murderer had not taken her very distinctive jewelry, which included a pink ring with 3 different colored stones and another ring that resembled wire loops intertwined to form the letter Mem or W. Could the M represent Mark? Or was it a family heirloom because Ginger's mother's maiden name was Waterworth? However, she had no identification on her person. The local police released pictures of the jewelry in the hopes of garnering public support, but they would not find out for a very long time. Meanwhile, the detectives needed a body or a lead to solve the case. On August 16, 1997, Jeff Rosen was suddenly contacted by phone. The caller claimed to have a lead on the Ginger case and identified himself as an Arizona federal agent. Rosen was curious. What was the connection between Ginger and John Flower's alleged sale of unlawful eavesdropping devices? The agent clarified. The agent went on. John had fled because he didn't want to be taken into custody, but Cheryl Subzone, his wife, had been taken into custody to be questioned. She abruptly began discussing Ginger Rios, who had vanished in Vegas a few months prior. While they were curious about the whereabouts of her husband, the agent went out of the room to call Rosin. Only now did Rosin realize that he had never asked the proprietor of the spy shop where Ginger was last seen a formal question. Nevertheless, Ginger's spouse had mentioned that a man and a woman were behind the counter. Rosin rushed to Arizona after requesting that the agents keep an eye on Cheryl. Rosin had no idea what would come out of Cheryl's interrogation. John Flowers turned to Cheryl and asked her to go buy film when Ginger came in to look at the books. When they worked together at the store, she frequently ran errands, so this wasn't out of the ordinary. After 10 minutes or so, Cheryl came back, and Mark entered. John informed Mark that his wife couldn't have gone very far because she had just left. After thanking them, Mark walked away. Cheryl's husband appeared to be a completely different person. His face was filled with fear. The man said, "I did something terrible. Whatever you do, don't go into the storage room." Cheryl didn't know what he meant, and she never thought her husband had hurt anyone. She asked him what was going on. She was disturbed by his actions, though, and after a little while she made the decision to look in the storage room. She discovered a young girl's lifeless body inside, with a pool of blood encircling her head, and there was blood on the carpet. The girl had suffered severe physical abuse. Before John sent Cheryl to get film, the same girl had come into the store. When Cheryl realized that John was right behind her, her disgust quickly gave way to fear. He took her by the neck before she had even turned around, warning her that if she talked about what had happened there, something bad would happen to both her and their child. Although Cheryl complied with his orders, she made the decision to speak the truth now that John was fugitive. John's explanation of the situation to Cheryl was of interest to the detective. John informed her that Ginger was in possession of a note from 2 of his former workers requesting payment. John was allegedly so enraged by Ginger's impudence and the contents of the note that he struck her so forcefully in the face that she fell back, struck her head, and passed away. But Cheryl had never seen the note and was certain that this was a lie. She was certain that John had spent hours in the storage room, wrapping the girl's body in plastic bags and dousing her in bleach after stealing garbage bags. He had informed the staff member that the dog had urinated in the room. After placing the body in his van, he instructed Cheryl that they must depart for Arizona right away. At that point, Ginger's husband and father came up to them and begged them to play the security camera footage. Ginger was lying inches from John and Cheryl, but they looked them in the eyes and lied. That's not all, though. Cheryl was also aware of the location of her husband's burial. You see, John and Cheryl had visited the Mojave Desert on multiple occasions. John once drove off with their baby and the body of the girl, leaving Cheryl in the middle of nowhere. He obviously drove home after burying her and coming back for Cheryl. For him, though, this was insufficient. In order for John to cover the shallow grave with a layer of concrete, they returned there multiple times. Cheryl was pretty sure the police had already found Ginger's body because it was the last time John had run back, screaming in panic, "They found her! They found her!" At any rate, she consented to show the detectives the place in return for not being charged. Since they didn't think Cheryl had anything to do with the murder, they accepted her offer. They followed her to the location. Upon their arrival in the desert, the local officers began to make connections between Cheryl's revelation and the body discovered by hunters in May. After asking them to stop, Cheryl took them to the location where her husband had been. Instead of discovering an empty grave, the police arrived at what appeared to be an undisturbed concrete slab. They found the body wrapped in plastic bags there. They were initially identified as Ginger because of a tattoo on her lower back, but they chose to hold off on telling her family until DNA testing was completed. Several questions were left unanswered by this. Were there 2 victims? Did John murder them both? Why, if so? Who was the other girl? They were now able to obtain a search warrant for the store in Vegas, where they discovered evidence of Ginger's blood. Later, the DNA analysis verified that she was also the owner of the body found in the desert. Mark was devastated because he had hoped that his wife had just moved on and started a new life. He held himself responsible, believing that he ought to accompany her to the store. But how could he have thought that his wife, a mother and his devoted wife, would be attacked by a total stranger, the proprietor of a well-known and often visited store? After a brief period of hiding, John was taken into custody at a Los Angeles hotel. The detectives found that John Flowers, the proprietor of the spy shop chain, was not present when the extradition procedure started. Rather, a 26-year-old man named Craig Jacobson was wanted for offenses in Florida. The boy had battled mental health problems since he was 10 years old, with borderline personality disorder, paranoia, and probably antisocial personality disorder. After a year in a mental health facility, he was sentenced to 30 months in prison and 3 years of probation. However, he vanished in 1995. John appeared in his place. In addition to this discovery, 2 months earlier, the police had discovered another possible victim of Craig or John. Before she could even look at the merchandise, the owner of the Vegas store came up to the adolescent girl, slung her over his shoulder and carried her into the storeroom without saying a word. She was extremely lucky, because John Flowers let her go after being frightened away by another customer who entered the store. Fear prevented this young woman from calling the police, and it might have been problematic for her to contradict the statement of a well-known businessman. Naturally, this was prior to the revelation of John's true identity. Psychiatrists examined him several times over the next few months and concluded he was not fit to stand trial. Despite being certain that Craig was lying, the prosecutor was concerned that the crime might go unpunished. He informed Ginger's family that a plea bargain would be the best course of action. Prior to being eligible for parole, Craig was sentenced to 25 years in prison after entering a guilty plea to the murder. Craig said that the other girl's name was Mary Stoddard. When he abducted and murdered her, she was the 18-year-old daughter of a chiropractor who had traveled to Vegas. In order to at least receive a life sentence or perhaps even the death penalty, Ginger Rios' family hoped that he would be charged with Mary's murder. The catch is that Mary Stoddard, who Craig described as the daughter of a chiropractor, was still alive and well. They had already taken a DNA sample and made a 3D model of the unidentified girl's possible appearance, but her body had already been exhumed. As it turned out, the documents containing information about her place of burial were lost, and no one knew which grave she was in, so this was all the police had. To put it another way, they had lost the body. The police, however, persisted in their efforts to identify her. There were 300 people on their list of missing persons. After 13 years, they were finally able to identify the girl on June 30, 2010. She was, more specifically, a 15-year-old girl from Phoenix, Arizona named Christina Mary Martinez. The girl lived in a group home, but she was mistreated there, so she frequently fled. She was taking a load of laundry to a self-service laundromat when she vanished on May 3, 1997. She passed Phoenix's spy shop on her way. Even though Christina had a rough upbringing, she had a lot of loved ones who were always looking for her, including her friend Valerie. To raise awareness of Christina's disappearance, Valerie set up a number of social media accounts. Valerie used to say, "I will never stop thinking about her, and I won't give up, no matter how long it takes. She is more than just a case number to me. I cherished her." Never giving up on finding someone is the essence of true love. Valerie had no idea that Christina, who was 16 years old when she vanished in the desert, had been found a week later. Regarding the girl's ring's mystery, the letter M on it stands for Martinez. It's interesting that Craig dated Mary Stoddard when they were both younger, according to the real Mary Stoddard's sister. If this is accurate, the man was already acting strangely at the time, and he might have become so obsessed with Mary that, after they broke up, he would constantly look for women who looked like her to vent his resentment. Given that Mary is still alive and Craig referred to Christina as Mary, it's plausible that, like many murderers, particularly serial killers, he had this fantasy in his mind when he committed the murder. Like the teenage girl from Vegas who survived because another customer scared the killer away, Craig most likely didn't plan his crimes, but instead gave in to impulsive behavior. Given that we know Ginger had visited the store prior to her disappearance, it's also possible that he specifically targeted victims. Craig never gave an explanation for his actions, but because Ginger's underwear was discovered around her ankles, investigators think the killings were motivated by violence against women. In any event, he will now be imprisoned for the remainder of his life after being charged with a second murder. Craig's ability to fool so many people with such ease is astounding. Mark and George, who were looking for Ginger, his own wife Cheryl, who was unaware of his secret personality, and even seasoned Vegas police officers who had seen a lot in their careers. A store owner with his wife and infant behind the counter makes you wonder where one can feel safe. He really seemed like a typical family man. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. One of the most terrifying scenes ever filmed is before you. Actual video of a serial killer on the loose. Because its owner was already being watched by the police, fate stepped in before the murder kit could take another life. From a sunny UK resort to a charming southern Italian town, he left a bloody trail in his wake. The criminal mastermind ridiculed the investigators and misled them by leaving obvious clues close to his victim. The man's bizarre fetish ultimately brought about his terrible demise, but it also motivated him to carry out unspeakably cruel deeds. Far from their busy hometown of Potenza, Italy, the Claps family was getting ready for a relaxing Sunday retreat at a small cottage in Tito on September 12, 1993. Luciano, their 20-year-old son, was with their parents, Antonio and Filomena. Gildo Claps, 24, their oldest son, and Elisa Claps, 16, their youngest daughter, were expected to arrive soon. Together with Elisa's friend Eliana D'Alessio, they were scheduled to arrive in the afternoon. Eliana and Elisa had decided to go to the town center church for a service. The girls then intended to head back to Elisa's house before having lunch at the cottage with the rest of the family. Gildo started to worry when the girls hadn't returned after an hour. His sister would call home if she was going to be late, and she was always on time. Eliana was the one who rang the doorbell. Eliana assumed her friend had already gone home after they parted ways at the church. The fact that Elisa was still missing shocked Eliana. Gildo wandered around the town center, worried, trying to find his sister. Elisa was not in the crowd of people that gathered around the church. The rest of the family returned to Potenza to inquire about the situation after Gildo and Elisa failed to show up by 2 p.m., and they were shocked to learn that the girl had disappeared. Gildo asked Eliana to describe his sister's precise morning movements. Eliana then admitted that she hadn't been entirely truthful. Elisa used the service as a pretext to meet with her friend, 21-year-old Danilo Restivo, a dental technician student, even though they didn't attend. Despite coming from a well-respected family, his father was the director of the local National Library branch. The young man was unpopular and frequently the object of jeering, particularly from girls. Being a good-hearted and sympathetic person, Elisa felt sorry for him, but she made it plain to him that they could not be together. However, he insisted on giving her a gift to celebrate her passing her exams, so she consented to meet him that day. Danilo and Elisa made plans to meet at the church as the service was coming to an end at 11:30 a.m. Eliana unintentionally ran into Angelica, another friend, while she was waiting outside. The girls thought they might have missed Elisa in the crowd, but they didn't see her leave the church. Gildo called Danilo's house and demanded an explanation because he was the last person to see his sister. According to Danilo, they sat at the altar and talked for 15 minutes during their meeting. Restivo stayed behind to pray after Elisa left the church, and that was the last time he saw her. After a few hours, Elisa didn't come home, so her brother Luciano went to see Restivo in person. Danilo's responses showed signs of nervousness and evasiveness. Luciano inquired as to what had happened after noticing a big bandage on his left hand. Restivo described how he cut his hand after tripping at a construction site. "I don't know where the girl is," he repeated. After Elisa's family called the police to report her missing, they asked that Restivo be questioned. However, their request was denied, and they were told to return home and wait for the girl to come back on her own. Gildo went back to the church because he had run out of options, but the door was locked. He made arrangements to enter and conducted another search of the building. He saw another locked door behind the altar, leading to the church's upper floor. When Gildo requested that door be opened as well, he was told that the priest, Father Domenico Sabbia, who had gone to a spa resort for a few days, was the only one with a key. When the police eventually spoke with Danilo 2 days later, after the girl had not returned, he stated that Elisa was unhappy at home and wanted to flee to Naples. but he attempted to talk her out of this plan. According to his version, he remained in the church while she left after their brief conversation. He said he asked her for advice about Paula, another girl he wanted to date, but he didn't mention the gift for Elisa. He returned home after the talk via a construction site where he had been with Paula just days before, where he had cut his hand after falling from an unfinished escalator. Investigators questioned whether Danilo was telling the truth. First of all, his statements were surprisingly accurate. Second, Elisa's desire to flee her devoted family was not supported by any evidence. Lastly, it was unclear how he fell head first from the escalator that was still under construction, only cutting his hand and avoiding breaking his glasses. When the police came to the Restivos' house, they asked to see the clothes their son was wearing that day. But without a warrant, Danilo's father wouldn't cooperate. Persuaded that Restivo was concealing something, the police checked his name in the database before leaving empty-handed. When he attacked other boys while playing with them at the age of 14, it turned out that he had already run afoul of the law. And it wasn't just that. 3 female students who lived close to his home accused him of stalking a few months ago. By calling girls at home and describing their attire, or playing them spooky music from the horror film Profondo Rosso, he obviously enjoyed making them feel afraid. Additionally, investigators learned that Danielo had a very peculiar habit. He enjoyed chopping off random people's hair while they were on public transit. Despite hearing about these incidents, the police were unable to establish Restivo. Meanwhile, word of Elisa Clapp's disappearance spread swiftly across the nation, and pranksters kept calling the family to say they had the girl and she was okay. While some of the messages claimed to have seen the girl in a white Fiat Uno, the police ignored the majority of these calls. The problem is that on that particular day, Elisa's friend Angelica disclosed that Ercilio Gegari, a 20-year-old admirer of hers, was out and about in the city center. Ercilio and his family had just arrived from Albania. Ercilio denied attending the church when he was asked to testify, and he gave the police the names of friends who could verify his alibi. But not only did his friends not believe his account, they also claimed that he was in the city center on the day the girl vanished. Additionally, one witness named Ercilio as the driver of a white Fiat Uno, which is the same model of vehicle that multiple witnesses reported seeing Elisa in on the day of her disappearance. When the police discovered Elisa's diary, which was missing several pages, suspicions of Ercilio's involvement increased. After reconstructing pieces of those pages, forensic specialists found that some words were written in Albanian. Ercilio was questioned again, and each time his account was altered. He once asserted that Danilo Restivo gave him instructions to deny knowing one another. Ercilio was eventually accused of providing false testimony. The police received an anonymous call in December. According to the female caller, she saw Elisa in Rome. Elisa had reportedly been assaulted and coerced into a white Fiat Uno. "Please help her and help me," the voice said toward the end of the call. The recorded call was analyzed and the results were shocking. Eliana was the caller. Because she was known to alter her version of events, investigators had long been suspicious of her statements. She was accused of providing false testimony, just like Ercilio. Detectives eventually concluded that Elisa was dead and that Danilo was to blame for her disappearance, even though they could not totally rule out the possibility that the girl had fled from home. He might have forced other people she knew to tell lies to the police, but they had nothing to accuse him or any other suspect of, other than false testimony in the absence of a body. However, the Claps family believed that powerful individuals, such as Danilo's father's friends and the priest of the church where she vanished, were defending the reputation of their daughter's murderer, even though all other churches were happy to have a box placed in the building where anyone could anonymously leave a note with information about Elisa. Father Domenico Sabia, in particular, forbade anyone from entering the church's attic. He even made an effort to deny ever knowing Danilo, but this was swiftly refuted when a picture of the two of them together on Danilo's 18th birthday appeared. Danilo Restivo was eventually taken into custody for providing false testimony after all the information was gathered. He received a 20-month prison sentence after being found guilty. Gildo was astounded by the legal system after the trial, questioning how someone could be found guilty of providing false testimony and still not be forced to tell the whole truth. However, Danilo was released after serving half of his sentence. There was nothing else the police could accuse him of. Because Eliana and Ursi allegedly gave false testimony out of fear for their own lives, Rather than to muddle the investigation, the judge did not find them guilty of perjury. Numerous rumors surfaced on the second anniversary of Elisa's disappearance in Potenza, including claims that she was being sold by human traffickers, was in the hands of the Sicilian mafia, or had a covert relationship with a priest. People who demanded money in exchange for information about the girl harassed the family on a regular basis. Elisa's family actively promoted public interest in the case in spite of the challenges. They developed a website to offer updates on the investigation as the internet started to gain popularity. An email purportedly written by Elisa appeared on the website on April 23, 1999. She said she was living in Brazil after leaving Potenza. The girl explained that she was unhappy and had to leave forever, but she also begged for forgiveness for hurting her family. "This will be my first and last letter to the family," she added. Filomena fervently hoped her daughter was still alive and well. Her sons weren't persuaded, though. They engaged a private investigator to track down the email's IP address because they knew their sister had left the house without cash or a passport, only to find out it was sent from a Potenza internet cafe rather than Brazil. Danilo Restivo was in the cafe when the email was sent, according to a list of all the patrons that day that the cafe staff had provided. Believing that Danilo had come up with this scheme to persuade them to stop looking for the girl, Elisa's family called the police right away and insisted on questioning him. They were informed, nevertheless, that there was nothing further they could do and that the investigation's active phase was over. 2,000 kilometers north of Potenza is the resort town of Bournemouth, which is situated on Britain's southern coast. For the Barnett family in Bournemouth, Tuesday morning, November 12, 2002, began as any other Tuesday morning. After dropping her children, Caitlin, age 11, and Terry, age 14, off at school, Heather Barnett, 48, came home after 8:30 a.m. As usual, Heather was eager to start working and have her morning tea. She made custom pillowcases, curtains, and other items from home. That day was no different from the many orders she always had. Terry and Caitlin came home from school a few hours later. Their mother was undoubtedly at home because her car was parked in the driveway and the radio was on, so the kids were a little uncomfortable with the unlocked front door. Their mother didn't answer. Caitlin called for her brother after looking in every room but the bathroom. She didn't want to enter for some reason. The kids knocked and got no answer, so they pushed the door, which slowly opened to reveal a horrifying scene. Evidently the victim of a very heinous crime, their mother lay on the floor. After phoning 911, Terry escorted his yelling sister outside to await the arrival of the police and ambulance. The neighbor across the street saw the two agitated kids while they were parking their car. Assuring the kids that they would be safe in their house, they took them inside. When the police arrived, they found no evidence of forced entry and that nothing had been stolen. Shortly after the woman dropped her kids off at school, the actual crime took place. Luminol testing showed that the woman's size 9 shoe prints led from the restroom to her workshop before abruptly vanishing in the center of the space. Before leaving the house, the murderer had obviously changed out of their filthy shoes and put on clean ones they had brought. The fibers found on the woman's body suggested that the offender had gloves on. Every piece of evidence suggested that the crime was well planned. The murderer arrived armed with gloves, a knife, a hammer, and a change of clothes and shoes. One piece of evidence, though, was left behind. A green hand towel that had been stained with Heather's blood was resting on the workshop chair. Only the murderer could have put the towel there, given its location and the fact that it did not belong to the family. Before putting on new clothes, they used it to clean their hands and face of the blood. The hair that was discovered in the woman's hands, however, was the most intriguing piece of evidence. At first, the police thought she had successfully removed a hair from the offender, but forensic examination showed something different. The hair in one hand belonged to Heather, but the hair in the other belonged to another woman, and it had been neatly cut with a sharp tool. Speaking with Caitlin and Terry, the detective discovered that their extra house keys had vanished a week prior to the murder. Although they changed the locks, they had suspicions because their neighbor had just come to get curtains for his girlfriend. The children were consoled by the same neighbor, an Italian man they called Danny. After moving to Britain in May 2002, Danilo Restivo, known to his neighbors as Danny, married Fiona Mozingo, an Italian woman he met online. Their residence was right across the street from Heather Barnett's. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they spoke with Danilo right away. and he quickly told them that he had an alibi for the whole morning. He said he went to classes at a computer center after taking a bus. His statements were fully supported by the police when they looked through his bus ticket and the center's registration log. However, Danilo grudgingly led the detective to the bathroom, where his sneakers were soaking in a bucket of bleach, when an officer came to his house 5 days later to take DNA samples and asked to see the shoes he had on the day of the crime. "I'm cleaning them," he explained. The detective became suspicious of this and seized the shoes. The sneakers did not, however, match the footprints that were discovered in Heather's home. The police had cause to suspect Danilo Restivo, despite the absence of concrete proof, because of his dubious actions when it came to cleaning his sneakers. When they chose to search a database for his name, they discovered something startling. Restivo's name had previously been connected to a criminal investigation. He might have been connected to the disappearance of Elisa Claps, a young Italian girl more than 10 years ago. His alibi for that case was also re-examined by investigators, who discovered that it was not as credible as first believed. He registered at a time that was rather awkwardly changed from 10:28 to 9:28 in the computer center's logbook. Nothing would have stopped him from getting off at the next stop and going back to Heather's house, even though he had a bus ticket with the allotted travel time. Additionally, at 9:24, a man who looked like him was seen on security footage crossing the street close to Heather's residence. Unfortunately, the man could not be precisely identified due to the poor quality of the video. However, Danilo was the main suspect in a case for the second time in his life, but this time, all of the evidence against him was circumstantial. When the detectives called the Potenza police, they learned of Danilo's uncommon fetish of chopping off the hair of unidentified girls. The investigators' conviction that he was involved in the crime was only reinforced by this information. When the police started monitoring Danilo Restivo in April 2004, they soon discovered another questionable behavior. Restivo enjoyed going to a secluded park in Throop, which is close to Bournemouth. There he would hide behind bushes and watch girls walking their dogs or jogging. Wearing 2 sets of clothes, waterproof pants, gloves, sunglasses, and a hooded sweatshirt that covered his face, he was in the park on May 12 despite the nearly summery weather. The police were worried that they wouldn't be able to stop another murder because of his suspicious behavior. A number of uniformed officers approached the suspect while posing as investigators of car thefts in the park and requested to examine his possessions in order to conceal the surveillance. Police discovered what they dubbed Restivo's murder kit, which included a big knife, ski mask, gloves, scissors, wet wipes, and trash bags. Remaining composed, Restivo said he had located the knife in the grass and had taken it to protect the kids. He claimed to be gathering insects for his pet lizard when asked what he was doing in the park. He was hiding in the park bushes, and even the police had to concede that it was a reasonable explanation. Once more, the detectives had nothing tangible to present to Danilo. The decision was made to switch strategies and ask for public support. The goal of the investigation was to identify the owner of the hair strands that were discovered in Heather's hand. They contacted the media in Italy and Britain, and since 2002, when Restivo relocated to Bournemouth, they have received a lot of calls from girls who have had their hair cut in incidents involving public transit in Britain. None of the DNA samples that the girls gave matched the hair that was discovered at the scene of the crime. The investigation stalled for a while until the hair strand was re-examined in 2007 using a new technique that could identify the hair's previous residence. It was discovered that the hair belonged to a girl who lived in the UK, but had traveled to Tampa, Florida, a few weeks after visiting Valencia, Spain, 2 months prior to having her hair cut. Motivated by such specific information, the police made another unsuccessful attempt to contact the public. The police worry that the girl might have been a victim of the killer's prior crime, but it's also possible that she was just not paying attention to the news. In spite of this early setback, science ultimately contributed to the case. Since technology had greatly improved by 2009, forensic specialists re-examined the green towel from Heather's home in the hopes of finding something new. This time, the specialists were able to distinguish Heather's blood from someone else's perspiration and skin fragments. An expert said that there was only a 1 in 5,7,000 chance that it was someone else's DNA, even though it couldn't be said with absolute certainty that it was Danilo Restivo's. Blood traces were discovered on the insoles of Restivo's sneakers when they were inspected that year using more advanced methods. This meant that when Restivo put on the shoes, his socks had blood on them. It supported the detective's hypothesis that the offender had brought an extra pair of shoes. Unfortunately, DNA analysis was completely impossible due to the bleach used, thus preventing Danilo and Heather's deaths from being directly linked. Restivo changed his clothes, put on gloves, and used bleach to get rid of bloodstains because he was aware of the evidence he might leave behind. Knowing what might link him to the crime scene, he made every effort to prevent it. He had a plan, was ready, and followed it. Thankfully, Restivo would eventually be charged with Heather's murder, but not before a terrible discovery was made in Italy. Something unexpected occurred in Potenza on March 17, 2010. The local church where Elisa had vanished years before was being repaired by workers. The attic door was no longer locked, and the priest had died 2 years earlier. 2 workers went upstairs, one using a flashlight to light his path while looking for roof damage. At that moment, he caught sight of something concealed behind construction debris in the room's corner. He was horrified to discover that he was staring at a mummified corpse. The girl's watch, glasses, and shoes were discovered on her body and were used to identify her. 17 years after going missing, Elisa Claps was found in the same church. She had died on the day of her disappearance, and her body had been dragged away and hidden, as the forensic examiner later concluded. Her body was found to have evidence of violence. However, several hair strands discovered in her hands, and a few more close to the body, were the most damning pieces of evidence. Professor Vincenzo Pascali in Rome was tasked with analyzing a sample of foreign DNA discovered on the girl's body, but, to put it mildly, he carried out the investigation rather sloppily and had ties to the church where the crime was committed. He said that the DNA did not match Danilo Restivo, but when the investigator decided to confirm this and sent the sample to another lab, it did match Restivo's DNA. The professor was placed on 18 months of work suspension, and on May 19, 2010, Restivo was arrested. The jury found Danilo guilty of Heather's murder on June 30, 2011. Following 5 hours of deliberation, he received a life sentence without the chance of release. But after he prevailed in an appeal on November 21, 2012, the court modified the punishment for Heather's murder and gave him a minimum of 40 years in prison. Restivo was found guilty of Elisa Claps' murder and given a 30-year prison sentence in absentia on November 11, 2011. Investigators believe it is crucial to look into Danilo Restivo's relationship to other unsolved crimes in both Italy and Britain because of his obvious propensity for murder. It is thought that he was most likely involved in the death of a 27-year-old North Korean student studying English in Bournemouth. 2 months prior to Heather's murder, on July 12, 2002, the girl, who went by the name Jung-uk Shin, Loki, was making her way home on foot following an evening spent with friends. She was fatally injured by an unidentified attacker just 3 blocks from Restivo's residence. By yelling at him, Loki was able to repel him, and he even told the medical staff that the assailant was wearing a ski mask. After 3 tries, another man was found guilty of this crime, but his conviction was based only on the testimony of a female informant who had previously made false statements and frequently found herself intoxicated. There were many inconsistencies in her story, and she failed to mention the killer's ski mask. The 2 girls' physical similarities lend credence to the idea that Restivo was involved. Furthermore, the fact that the murder took place on the 12th of the month, as did the killings of Elisa and Heather, as well as the fact that Restivo visited the park where his murder kit was discovered, indicates the importance of this date to him. The length of the knife found in the park with Danilo is the same as the wound on Loki's body. Furthermore, different hair strands were discovered on the sidewalk close to Loki, but it was challenging to pinpoint their exact origin because of the nearby hair salon. From a legal standpoint, Loki's case is over. 2 murders have been formally charged against Danilo Restivo. Investigators are certain that there might be additional victims, though. Elisa's body was meticulously concealed, but Heather's was cruelly displayed for her own kids to see. Experts say that this shows that the criminal changed and that he was unable to stop on his own. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. In December 2010, at St. Malachy's Church in Tyrone, Northern Ireland, it all began exactly where it ended. In front of more than 300 guests, beauty queen and educator Michaela Hardy and athlete John McArevey exchanged vows. But 3 weeks later, John came back with his young wife's body, buried in her immaculate wedding dress. What caused Michaela to pass away? Who could be so cold-blooded and cunning as to murder a woman who had just recently started to enjoy her wedded life with her beloved? And will international cooperation aid in the investigation of one of the most horrific and unforgettable crimes of the past several years? In 2005, John McArevey, the captain of the Irish football team, and Michaela Hardy, the daughter of one of the nation's best football managers, met in university. The young couple fell in love at first sight and had never been apart since. Michaela gladly accepted John's proposal while on vacation in Paris. On New Year's Eve, which was also Michaela's 27th birthday, they scheduled their wedding. Following the formal wedding, the newlyweds flew out on their 3-week honeymoon. Before the most anticipated portion of their trip, 2 weeks at the 5-star Legends Hotel, situated in the fishing village of Grand Gabe on the northeast coast of Mauritius, began, they spent the first week in Dubai. Michaela thoroughly investigated local hotels before deciding on Mauritius as their idyllic honeymoon destination. They chose the Legends Hotel because it has a lot of good evaluations and is well liked by Irish travelers. They asked the hotel's receptionist if they could be assigned to one of the better rooms when they first arrived. They were told that room 1025 in the premium block was available. On January 10, 2011, after having breakfast together, John opted to play golf while Michaela sunbathed. They had lunch together once more. After lunch, Michaela usually looked forward to tea with something tasty. While she went to the room to get Kit Kat bars with her favorite dark chocolate, which she had bought from Dubai and placed in the refrigerator, she requested her husband to get tea. Although John offered to bring her the snacks, she chose to go alone because the accommodation was only 150 feet from the restaurant. While waiting for his wife to come home, John viewed videos and shot some pictures. After a while, he started to question why Michaela hadn't returned. He made the decision to find her. John knocked on the door but got no answer. He went to the receptionist after forgetting his key in the room and failing to see anything through the window. After guiding him back to the room, the corridor attendant used his key to open the door. However, the corridor attendant heard a man's cries for urgent assistance as soon as he moved a short distance away from the door. John walked into the room and found his wife in the cold water bathtub. Her lips were blue, her skin was cold to the touch, and there were noticeable bruises on her neck. John tried to assist Michaela, supposing she had planned to take a bath because of back problems, but had slid or passed out. But his attempts were unsuccessful. The dreams of a young, contented married couple came to an end when medical authorities declared Michaela dead within an hour. People kept coming and going from the newlyweds' room, and no one tried to protect the crime scene, perhaps since it was initially assumed to be an unfortunate accident. When the police entered the room and saw Michaela's condition and the chaos within, they assumed a murder had occurred, even though they had been told that a tourist had drowned. After being brought to the police station, the distressed spouse was detained for 5 hours while being questioned. Given that most murders are carried out by people who are close to the victims, this was not unusual. The harshness and inappropriateness of the police officer's remarks in John's situation were unusual. John was obviously overcome with grief by Michaela's passing. He found his wife's lifeless body in the bathtub, while only 30 minutes before he had seen her joyfully making her way to their room. But when a policeman noticed that he was crying, he may have tried to comfort him by saying, "Why are you crying? You're still young, you'll find yourself a new wife." If the hotel manager hadn't stepped in, it's unclear how long they would have held John at the station. The management reported to the police that a master key that was taken and fit all the locks had been used to open the door of room 1025. It became clear that a member of the hotel staff was responsible for the murder. Most likely, it was an accidental killing. At 2:42 p.m., a staff member, possibly a security guard with the master key, entered the room. Michaela opened her own door 2 minutes later. The maid's sudden appearance forced the thief, who might have been hiding in a tiny alcove in the toilet, to make a snap decision. Since cleaning rooms is a standard procedure in hotels, he could have just grinned at Michaela and pretended to do his job if it was part of his responsibilities. Nothing would have happened. He was aware that his presence in the room would be difficult to explain, though, if he was a security guard. He then saw no choice but to hide in the bathroom and wait for the woman to just go. However, that did not occur. Michaela chose to seize the chance and went into the restroom as investigators conjectured. She found the robber inside. The thief attacked Michaela in a panic after she fled in fear. He put Michaela in the bathtub after realizing that he had killed her, possibly in an attempt to make it seem like an accident involving the maid. Despite the shock, he may have also imagined that water would wash away any DNA evidence left on his victim. The murderer was still present when John got up from the table at 3:05 p.m. to see why his wife was taking so long. John could have apprehended the murderer at the spot if he had his keycard with him, but by the time he approached the administrator, requested that the door be unlocked, and stepped into the room, it was 3:26 p.m., and the thief, who had inadvertently become a murderer, had disappeared. The cops were under tremendous pressure to release John. It is critical to settle the case as soon as possible when a visitor is slain in a nation that depends significantly on tourism. The local police head claimed that the island had a 100% homicide clearance rate, which gave the impression that the case would be resolved quickly. Given that Michaela was one of 30 persons slain on the island in 2011, and that all cases but Michaela's were resolved by dubious confessions, one might assume he was merely praising the work of his colleagues, but any professional would be cautious. The police once again used admissions to solve every case the following year. The investigators had a perfect crime scene, which may have made up for the police's over-reliance on instinct and intuition, if that's what it is. Surveillance cameras were installed all throughout the hotel, the room was cleaned daily, the security system recorded every entry, and the hotel itself was essentially an invincible fortress with watchful security personnel everywhere. That was not at all the case, as we shall see in a moment. 2 hotel staff members were detained by the police within 2 days after the murder, and 2 of them, Avinash Tribhovan and Sandeep Munia, were charged with the crime. The other staff members obligingly became important prosecution witnesses. Dasan Narayanan, a hotel security guard, was also taken into custody a week later. On the day of the murder, Dasan was on duty. His fingerprints were discovered on a phony key that the robbers used to replace the stolen universal key in the security room, although it was impossible to determine his precise position at the time of the crime. There was nothing Dasan could do to explain how his DNA got onto the room's safe door. He gave a preemptive explanation for why his DNA might be present if it were discovered, acknowledging that he had touched Michaela's cheek in his haste to assist John. Nevertheless, the police chose to concentrate their efforts on Avinash and Sandeep and merely charged Dasan with being an accomplice to the thefts, despite his contradictory testimony. In 2012, the trial started on May 22. The police's pattern of obtaining confessions served as the foundation for the prosecution's case. According to the prosecution, Michaela discovered Avinash and Sandeep stealing cash from the safe or her purse when she returned to the hotel that day. In order to save their jobs, the robbers chose to silence Michaela because hotel workers frequently provide the majority of their family's income, not just their close relatives. Their colleague Raj Thikoi also provided testimony during the trial. After being arrested at first, he was granted immunity and turned out to be the most important prosecution witness. Raj claimed that although he was close to the room and heard a woman's anguished cries, he chose not to knock on the door. Rather, he hid and watched as Sandeep and an upset, sweaty Avinash left the newlyweds' room. When he later inquired about what had transpired, they responded, "Nothing happened, just keep quiet. If you say anything, we'll involve you in this matter." Prosecutors mostly relied on the confession that one of the suspects, Avinash Tribhovan, gave, in accordance with standard police procedures, in addition to witness statements. Because of their negligent investigation, it appeared as though the police were being judged alongside Sandeep and Avinash, even though they were the ones who were implicated. The defense lawyers called attention to all of the investigators' obvious flaws, errors, and gaps. First of all, the hotel was not closed when Michaela's death was found. and neither a visitor nor a staff member was questioned. The evidence was compromised since some tests were not carried out and others weren't done until the hotel room was given back to them. Although palm and fingerprints were discovered in the room, their owners were not recognized. However, there was no DNA evidence that Sandeep and Avinash were guilty. Even the paper money, which the authorities said the robbers were interested in, was not scanned for DNA or fingerprint. The court was also informed that numerous significant artifacts were not captured at all, and that all of the photos taken at the crime scene were in black and white. The enigma surrounding the 46 security cameras that recorded the activities within and outside the hotel, however, generated the most controversy. The cops refused to give the defense lawyers the videotapes in spite of repeated requests. As it turned out, they were unable to conceal the footage, not because they wanted to. Due to their inability to control the cameras, the police officers deleted 90% of the videos. Instead of providing a truthful response when asked to explain how the apparatus operates, they merely hit the button, which also happened to be the record button, and when they believed they were playing back the recordings, they were actually erasing them. International media questioned whether the local authorities were purposefully undermining the probe due to the police's obvious incompetence. Lastly, the defendants asserted that they only confessed after the police tortured them. Sandeep, who reportedly handed the keycard, stated that he was forced to make the confession under threat of a firearm. Avinash also refuted his testimony, claiming that he vomited blood after being tortured and subjected to water interrogation by the police. He was also allegedly informed that his wife would be deported and that he would have to move to Ireland to live with John McAvery, who would now require a new wife. Avinash claimed that he only signed the document that was given to him, not even reading his own confession. Even though he and Sandeep were in room 1009 where a VIP customer was scheduled to stay when the murder occurred, another witness said he was coerced into providing false testimony. Sandeep demanded that his subordinate keep the space spotless at all times. He even picked up the mop personally at one point to show how the floors should be cleaned. Telecommunications data also supported Sandeep's assertion that he was speaking on the phone with his sister in Britain at the time of the incident. Lastly, it was verified by the retained security camera film that he was in a separate area of the hotel when the murder occurred. The court case took over 8 weeks to complete, even though it was only supposed to take 2 weeks. This was mostly because the defense lawyers went beyond the bounds of decency and made the trial into a spectacle. They frequently cracked jokes and caused the board, spectators, and law students in the courtroom to erupt in laughter. The defense brought up the possibility of a sexual motive for the crime, implying that Michaela's husband was involved. They implied potential wrongdoing between John and his wife and mentioned an intimate aid they discovered in the hotel room, but it was actually a straightforward insert from Cosmopolitan, a women's magazine Michaela had bought at the airport. Then, using a purportedly verified video, they tried to demonstrate that John and Michaela had a heated argument, but the people in the video weren't Michaela and John. Rather, they were 2 Germans who looked like them. In order to verify that he was the man in the video, John had to reach out to him on Facebook and ask him to give a statement at a German police station. All things considered, the sensationalism surrounding Michaela's murder case caused great distress to her family. Specifically, John was ranked highly on the list of readers' choices in a survey called Who Killed Michaela that was published by a local newspaper. In addition, the police released pictures of Michaela's battered and nude body to the Mauritius newspaper, which caused her family unimaginable distress. But these 8 weeks were over, and the jury members had to decide what to do. After a guilty conviction, Michaela's family thought the accused would have the right to request a review of the case because the judge gave a clear summary of the case and highlighted the suspect's culpability. They were certain that the verdict would be just what they had expected. The court also firmly asked the jurors to make the appropriate choice from their point of view, rather than to think about how this case would affect the nation's reputation. And the jury found Avinash and Sandeep not guilty, after 2 months of trial and just 2 hours of deliberation. After the acquittal verdict, John and Michaela's families were incredibly disappointed. They endured all the agony of the process, inappropriate remarks from attorneys and police, tolerated laughter in the courtroom, and even faced aggressive behavior from the locals because they were confident that the guilty parties would be punished for the murder. They were certain of Avinash and Sandeep's guilt and believed that they were acquitted because the case received global media attention and the jurors did not want the murder case to reflect negatively on Mauritius' image. The Hart and McKervey families cannot forget that Avinash's lawyer appeared on a local radio station and essentially admitted his client's guilt, mentioning how Avinash cried and apologized to Michaela's family. The interview was supposed to be presented in court, but the lawyer managed to evade his responsibilities. John believes that Avinash told the truth when he confessed to Michaela's murder. He is why, when everyone hears about death by strangling, they image the killer suffocating the victim, ripping their neck with 2 hands. But Avinash recalled that when they were in the honeymoon suite, Michaela walked in and spotted him clutching a pocketbook. She asked what he was doing. She couldn't have known that Sandeep was in the bathroom. When the girl tried to prevent Avinash from leaving the room, standing in his path, Sandeep approached her from behind and put one hand around her neck. The truth is, the autopsy report was prepared much later, and it confirmed that everything happened exactly as Avinash claimed. If Avinash wasn't certain, how could he have created such a strangulation technique? Avinash added that when Michaela fell, she struck her head on the ground. That was further supported by a bruise discovered on the back of her skull during the postmortem. Furthermore, in summarizing the case, the judge reminded everyone that Avinash made his confession on January 12 and signed it on the 13th in the presence of his lawyer. Avinash would have been made to sign something else on the 12th if the cops had intended to fake the confession. Furthermore, 3 other doctors evaluated the youngster on separate days, and none of them discovered any evidence of abuse. After the acquittal verdict, a new investigation was launched. The key card that the murderer and thief used to enter the room was the main piece of evidence that the police concentrated on. Even these locks' mechanism, though, is unreliable. It is impossible to pinpoint the precise moment the murderer entered Michaela's room because the 240 locks in the Legends Hotel are not synced, and each one displays its unique time on the security system's dashboard. Because the precise hour of the crime is uncertain, this puts almost every suspect's alibi into doubt. The situation was exacerbated by the discovery of yet another serious weakness in the hotel's guest security. The number of possible suspects could rise from dozens to hundreds as a result of this vulnerability. Mauritian law states that the beach is public property if the hotel owns the guest rooms, dining establishments, bars, golf courses, and other such places. Locals own the island's beaches, and traders and fishermen have always had complete access to the hotel's grounds and the beach. Young boys are used to hanging around on the hotel grounds, and local craftsmen sell their wares to visitors. To put it another way, the hotel cannot guarantee the security of its property, even with cameras, gates, and security guards, and there is no way to confirm who entered the honeymoon room. Consequently, there were no noteworthy discoveries made during the fresh inquiry into the matter. Under international pressure, the Mauritian police examined Michaela's murder many times and even sought the services of a French laboratory for retesting DNA evidence. The discovery of DNA on Michaela's clothing that matched that of one of the suspects was reported as a major breakthrough in 2014, but this finding wasn't enough to justify a new trial. John offered a sizable reward for information regarding the case in 2017, in an effort to bring it back into the public eye. A lawyer called him a few weeks after he got back home to tell him that Sandeep and Avinash would now undoubtedly be arrested. Michaela's family was relieved and thought they would finally receive justice, but the attorney did not name the new evidence that made this possible. But months and weeks went by with no one being taken into custody. The case was formally ended in 2020, but the Mauritius government agreed to revisit it in 2021 after pressure from Irish MPs. A desire to re-examine the matter does not ensure that it will be resolved, which is the problem. It is difficult to investigate any crime after 10 years, not to mention the potential that Mauritius's authorities would not be motivated to track down the murderers. Many investigators have advanced in their careers over the course of 10 years, so if something is disclosed in the case that many would rather keep hidden, heads will roll. Following the trial, the relatives of John and Michaela sued the hotel for $1.6 million. The terms of the out-of-court settlement are not made public, but the funds were donated to a charity set up in Michaela's memory. Both the Legends Hotel, which was renamed the Lux Hotel, and Room 1025, which was renovated and given the new number 1026, are still quite popular. At a memorial luncheon for Michaela in 2013, John, who is now an accountant, met a sweet girl called Kara Brennan. John proposed to Kara, who works as an accountant, in 2015. James McAravey, the couple's first child, was born last year. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. A 24-year-old girl went missing from the store where she worked the evening shift. Police discovered traces of blood in the back room and signs of a struggle, but it was not a robbery. The unknown perpetrator had left a fully stocked cash register. A few days later, the girl's body was discovered 5 kilometers from the store. The investigation into this terrible case lasted nearly 25 years. Lisa Sievert's fate was unknown for nearly a quarter of a century. Lisa Marie Seeger was born March 24, 1968, in Holyoke, Massachusetts. She was raised in a close-knit family with 3 other children. Aside from her, they lived in a town called Agawam. The girl has always been interested in music and has learned to play a variety of instruments. She was even a part of the school music group. Lisa attended Westfield State University after graduating from high school and earned a teaching degree in 1990. As an intern, she works multiple shifts as a counselor at a children's camp, while also teaching Sunday school at her church. After that, she works as a teacher's aide at Agawam High School, where she previously studied. At 24 years old, she spent the majority of her time working with a group of special needs children. She understood her students better than any other teacher, and she was also very professional, ensuring that each of her students received the best education possible. She also worked part-time at a local card and gift shop. On Wednesday, April 15, 1992, she finished her school shift around 5:30 and went to the store, where she worked until 9 p.m. At around 5 p.m., her sister Lynn briefly joined her at work. Lisa recalled being in a good mood that evening, and nothing foretold trouble. The next morning, saleswoman Sophia Maynard arrived at the store and was scheduled to start her shift at 9 a.m. Lisa was surprised to find her car in the parking lot. It was unusual because the girl worked at school in the mornings and was not supposed to be in the store. Sophia thought Lisa might have been out for the morning shift due to the approaching Easter. They were planning to inflate balloons for sale for that holiday. Sophia walked in the store and called Lisa by name, but there was no response. When she approached the counter, she saw her things there. Including her wallet and car keys, it all looked very strange, so if she decided to call the police, a squad arrived at the store and began their inspection. Everything seemed normal. A heel strike. Despite this, they were unable to locate any useful leads on the premises. It was soon discovered that Lisa had also failed to arrive at school this morning. The principal even called her mother to see if everything was fine, but she had no idea where her daughter was. Lisa's disappearance quickly spread throughout the small town, and within hours all of her friends, relatives, and acquaintances had joined the investigation. The police began by developing a robbery theory, which quickly fell apart. Nobody had touched the money in Lisa's cash register or wallet. All of the merchandise was also available. Detectives then began to reconstruct the chronology of events. That evening, they learned that Lisa's sister had left the store at around 6 p.m. After talking to employees at neighboring stores, they obtained more information at about 7:20 p.m. Lisa spoke with the owner of the carpet store next door. They discussed a pressing problem with the local parking lot, which was being occupied by bowling alley customers. The owner told her that he himself would not risk voicing his displeasure with the drivers who parked in front of there. The door was open, but the clerk never emerged. The woman thought she heard noise in the back room, but she decided to leave. As a result, the police determined Lisa's disappearance occurred around 8:20 p.m. She served her final customer, and by 9 o'clock, something had happened to her. The detectives were to figure out what had happened during those 40 minutes. The local investigators were assisted by the FBI and state police, who coordinated a massive search. Foot squads searched the area surrounding the store from helicopters. The more distant terrain police dogs were also brought to the store in the hopes of tracking Lisa down. Unfortunately, none of this led to any results. Investigators concluded that Lisa had clearly not left the store of her own free will, so on April 17th, the head of the local police announced a reclassification of the case which had previously been classified as a missing person case. 2 days after her disappearance, police were already looking into a kidnapping. On Sunday morning, April 19th, all local churches prayed that Lisa would be found alive and unharmed. It was Easter, but there was no holiday spirit whatsoever. At around 2 p.m., the police received a call. A man was walking his dog on the outskirts of town near Highway 75, walking along a wooden area when he noticed a woman's body and immediately contacted law enforcement. Officers arrived on the scene and identified Lisa Sievert. They found multiple wounds on her body from a sharp object. Later, medical experts determined that the girl had also been abused. Her body was about 5 kilometers from the store, which meant that the perpetrator most likely drove the girl here in a car. A farewell ceremony was held at the church where the girl taught on Sundays. It was attended by nearly 1,000 people. The residents of the small town, who were accustomed to a quiet and safe life, panicked. Many store owners eliminated single shifts, and employees walked each other to their cars. The self-defense sections became overcrowded in a matter of days. In addition, approximately 300 women applied for firearm ownership permits. The entire town feared that an unknown criminal would strike again. The police and FBI were working on the case almost all day and night. It soon became clear that they had obtained a DNA sample from the crime scene that could belong to the killer. They developed the theory that Lisa's boyfriend was involved, but he had an alibi and his DNA did not match the sample. They discovered that the girl's friends, coworkers, and relatives had all undergone DNA testing, but there were still no matches. The police also received numerous tips from local residents. Some reported seeing a suspicious car on the night of Lisa's murder, while others claimed to know the identity of the perpetrator. However, all of these leads led nowhere, and detectives sifted them from the tire tracks on the road near where the body was discovered. The police determined that they were abandoned by a van or large SUV. Detectives questioned all drivers of similar vehicles and were no closer to apprehending the perpetrator, but they did locate a witness who may have seen the same vehicle. At around 9:15 p.m., an employee from a store near Lisa's workplace drove home. Standing at a traffic light, she noticed a large SUV pull off the road and head toward the location where Lisa's body was later discovered. The woman was unable to describe the car in greater detail because it was dark outside. She only mentioned that she thought there were a man and a woman in the car. She also mentioned that when the car pulled onto the dirt road, the woman's head twitched unnaturally, as if she were asleep or unconscious. Because this information did not aid in the identification of the suspect, all leads have been exhausted. The police continued to investigate the case, but with each passing month, the prospect of solving this macabre mystery faded. It took 1.5 years before Lisa's family and friends were given another chance to discover the truth. In October 1993, national television aired an episode about the caves. The popular program aired stories about unsolved cases, which drew a lot of attention. This sometimes resulted in new witnesses for the police. The case got a second wind. Lisa's case was no exception. Within an hour of the broadcast, the police had received hundreds of calls from people with information. As is often the case, the majority of these leads led nowhere, but the police pursued each one thoroughly. The detectives stated that they had identified a few valuable leads, but did not specify which ones. Unfortunately, it did not go anywhere. The chances of solving the case decreased steadily over time. Lisa's family went to great lengths to ensure that her legacy was never forgotten. Although Lisa's teaching career was cut short early on, her relatives made significant contributions to the Agawam educational system in 1995. Lisa's parents donated $11,000 to the science division of the school where she worked. These funds were used to buy equipment and support genetics classes. The parents also established a fund to assist gifted students, which distributed approximately $35,000 in awards. Lisa was murdered 10 years ago. Her mother refused to give up hope that the case would ever be solved. She went to great lengths to honor her daughter's memory. Her mother participated in all interviews and answered reporters' questions. Every year, hundreds of people gathered to light candles in Lisa's memory. Meanwhile, police had only one piece of significant evidence in their possession: a DNA sample from the alleged killer. They kept cross-referencing it with known criminal databases, hoping that the right person would show up sooner or later, but it never happened. A new method of DNA phenotyping essence is as follows. Using the information embedded in a person's DNA, experts determine the features of his appearance and construct an assumed portrait at the time. Specialists can use DNA to determine sex, approximate age, eye and hair color. The portrait created from this data is not always accurate, but the coincidence with a real person's face can be amazing. Experts presented 2 portraits of Lisa's alleged killer, aged 25 and 50, based on DNA evidence. When the police department posted these portraits, they received over 170 calls. These individuals reported seeing a similar man, but the majority of these leads also led nowhere. Only a year later, on September 18, 2017, police issued a high-profile announcement that the perpetrator had been apprehended. Gary Shara, 49, was the man who revealed himself. The news quickly went viral in the American media. When the police find the killer after a quarter of a century, it is extremely rare, so such stories immediately piqued the public's interest. Investigators revealed how they located Cher shortly after his arrest. It turned out that the man was considered a suspect in 1993, a year after Lisa was murdered. Remember the federal television program that prompted the police to receive hundreds of calls with potential leads? A lawyer from Seattle was among those who called in. He informed detectives that his client may have information about Lisa's murder. She was a woman in the process of divorcing her husband. They lived in the town of Long Meadow, which was near Agawam. According to the woman, her husband was paying more attention to Lisa Sievert's case. If this murder were on television, he would rush into the room and stare blankly at the screen, completely unresponsive to those around him. As you may have guessed, this man was Gary Shara. He was 24 years old at the time. He was in a very troubled marriage with a 1-year-old son. He and his wife were constantly fighting and had begun divorce proceedings shortly after their child's birth. According to the police statement, they developed a theory that Gary was involved in 1993, but found no evidence to back it up. On the contrary, using his ex-wife as a source of information raised concerns. The truth is that she suffered from a variety of mental disorders and had a long history of alcohol abuse. Furthermore, during their divorce, Gary obtained custody of their son through the courts, but his wife secretly relocated the child to another state. Another important point to note is that this was not the first time former or current wives had called the police, alleging that their husbands were involved in Lisa's murder. Surprisingly, there were many such calls, so the detectives assumed Gary's case was just one of them. However, they questioned him, and the man denied his involvement and refused to provide a DNA sample. Because no one could legally force him to provide a sample, the police were left with few options. Later, detectives compiled a list of all the men interviewed in the case who refused to provide a DNA sample. Gary was among them, and the police called him in for questioning several more times. During the 3rd interview in 2008, it was apparent that Gary was trying not to touch anything, not even the table. He was offered a bottle of water, but he refused. He looked as if he had only one thing on his mind: how the cops wouldn't get his DNA sample. By 2017, detectives had a list of 11 suspects on their hands, including Gary. All of them had been interviewed at various stages of the investigation and refused to voluntarily submit to DNA testing. In fact, there were many more suspects on that list, but through DNA phenotyping, investigators were able to weed out unsuitable candidates. They did not match some of the characteristics that experts determined from the DNA sample of Lisa's killer. In August 2017, detectives gathered all available information and went to court. They asked for an order compelling all the list members to provide DNA samples, and the court agreed. On September 13th of that same year, police went to Gary's apartment to notify him of this obligation, but the man was not home. The door was opened by his neighbor with whom they shared an apartment. The detectives left him their business card and asked him to give the information to Gary urgently. The very next day, something unexpected happened. Gary's current girlfriend came to the police station and reported that he had left 3 letters in her apartment. The researcher was surprised to find an apology to the secret family, as well as a detailed confession of Lisa's murder on 2 sheets. Gary wrote that he had violent and uncontrollable desires since childhood, and that evening he was obsessed with the idea of kidnapping and abuse. Gary, as he stated in a letter, allowed himself to do something horrible while driving past Lisa. The man stated that he did not intend to kill Lisa, but events allegedly spiraled out of his control. Gary stated that he wanted to surrender to the police hundreds of times but was unable to do so due to cowardice. He admitted to having suffered from self-loathing for many years. At the end of the letter, he stated his intention to commit suicide. Police immediately began looking for Gary, and his car was soon discovered in Another suicide note was found on the windshield of a car in Stafford Springs Hospital parking lot. The man had ingested some powerful drugs, but he immediately got into his car and drove to the nearest hospital, where he was pumped out. When the doctors finished helping Gary, the police arrested him and took him to the station. At the same time, a judge issued a search warrant for both his and his girlfriend's apartments. The police discovered several objects containing his DNA. No one was surprised by the results of the analysis. It matched the killer's sample exactly, as well as several other potentially significant leads. Gary's wife, who had reported suspicions about him back in 1993, died in 2014. However, investigators discovered documents drafted by her lawyer in which the woman revealed numerous gruesome details. One day, Gary told her in plain language that he could not engage in intimacy with her unless he had a knife in his hand. The day after Lisa's murder, the woman called her sister and told her that Gary had come home late at night, was extremely disturbed, and his body was covered with scratches. He also gave his wife a music box and said that he had bought it at the very store where Lisa worked, except according to Gary himself, it was an older woman with gray hair who sold it to him. The problem is that no such employee has ever been there. It is not clear why all these details were not reported to the police in 1993, and it is impossible to find out now. While in custody, Gary suddenly proclaimed his innocence and refused to confess to what he had done. In all likelihood, he was driven by simple fear, but with that kind of evidence, there was no chance of getting away with it. The only thing he was able to achieve was a postponement of his sentence. The trial was not to begin until 2 years later, but Gary, who had been in a cell the whole time, suddenly decided to confess on September 21, 2019. He appeared before a judge and pleaded guilty to the murder of Lisa Sievert. This charge qualified as first-degree murder, and in Massachusetts, a defendant on such a sentence faces life in prison without parole. Lisa's family was present in the courtroom. Her mother, who had waited 25 years to learn the truth, spoke. She thanked everyone involved in the investigation, as well as the ordinary concerned people who had been there for her family throughout. As a result, the killer went on to live the rest of his life. Despite taking a quarter of a century, one of the state's longest-running criminal cases was finally closed behind bars. The harsh reality in such a situation is anything but endless ignorance. Take care, and thank you for watching. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Jasmine Block, a 15-year-old from Alexandria, Minnesota, had 1 month until the start of the new school year on August 8, 2017. She was having a great time boating with her friends during her summer vacation, but by nightfall, Jasmine was suffering from a headache. Sarah, her mother, suggested that she take it easy and wait for the pain to subside. Jasmine laid down after taking her mother's advice. Sarah had to leave for an urgent family matter at 10:30 p.m. Before leaving the house, she made sure Jasmine was okay and would attempt to get some sleep. Knowing that Jasmine's older sister and her boyfriend were at home gave her comfort. 3 hours later, Sarah found her younger daughter gone when she got home. To her surprise, the top portion of the pajamas she was sleeping in was on the floor, and Jasmine's phone, keys, and bag were all at home. She had also lost 2 pairs of shoes. At first, Jasmine's family thought she had just gone outside to get some fresh air in the hopes that her headache would go away, because she had never left a note before. She wasn't in the house, though. Because her daughter was terrified of the dark, Sarah was certain that she wouldn't flee, especially at night. This indicated that she had been abducted. Sarah became so worried that she called the police. Hundreds of locals and the police joined the search for the missing teen in the days that followed. Posters asking anyone who saw Jasmine to report her whereabouts were displayed everywhere. The young girl found herself in the worst nightmare imaginable as the hunt for Jasmine went on. A family friend named Thomas Barker visited them that evening on August 8th while she was trying to fall asleep despite having a headache. Since she was a young child, Jasmine has known Thomas Barker, the 32-year-old father of her best friend. The youngest of his 6 children was born only a month ago, and he was married. Jasmine believed him when he told her that his son was having a breakdown of some kind, and that he couldn't manage it alone. In an attempt to soothe his son, Thomas asked if she could accompany him to their house. Even though it was late, Jasmine was unable to turn down his request, but she had a hazy feeling of danger during the ride. Her instinct was correct. The story about his son's breakdown was really a pretext. Rather, Barker drove Jasmine 16 kilometers from her home to a remote mobile home in the neighboring town of Carlos. Barker attacked her out of the blue and used zip ties to bind her hands and feet. Jasmine's actual nightmare started inside the mobile home. Before attacking her, Barker threatened her with his gun. Once his craving was satiated, Barker told his victim why he had taken her hostage. He brought up the incident a few days prior when Jasmine fell while riding a bicycle with his son. She revealed a bruise on her body by slightly lifting her shirt. For Thomas, it was an innocent incident. The 32-year-old man's inappropriate thoughts were triggered by it, which ultimately led him to abduct her. Barker and Jasmine stayed in the mobile home for the next few days. After 3 days, Thomas's old friend Joshua Holby, 31, and his acquaintance Stephen Powers, 20, arrived at the house, decreasing Jasmine's chances of escaping. Jasmine was mistreated by all 3 men, but Stephen in particular was not ashamed to participate in the abuse. Although Joshua didn't try to hurt her, he also didn't try to free her or call the police. Jasmine was kept in a utility room most of the time and made an effort to keep quiet out of concern that they would hurt her or worse. At intervals, they fed her fast food and water, and all 3 of them tried to kill her several times. Barker tried to kill Jasmine twice in the 13 days she was left alone with him. His initial attempt to drown his captive was unsuccessful because Jasmine resisted and fought valiantly to save her life. On his second try, he came up with a darker scheme. He put her in a bag with the intention of drowning her in the bathtub. However, Jasmine was able to chew a hole in the bag, insert her fingers, then her hand, and eventually free herself when he left her in the bedroom to fill the tub. When Barker realized she was out of the bag, he became furious and hit her. He briefly gave up on trying to get rid of her, but he later went back to his evil schemes with the help of his cronies. Stephen helped Barker attempt to drown Jasmine on the 3rd attempt. He taped a sock shut after jamming it into her mouth, but despite both men's best efforts, the young girl was fighting for her life with great vigor and they were unable to overcome her. Joshua, the heaviest of the kidnappers, sat on top of Jasmine after the criminals realized that drowning her would not work and sandwiched her between 2 halves of a sofa bed with a pillow over her head. They had a very clear idea. They wanted Jasmine to choke, but she persisted in struggling, kicking, and fighting, so this plan also failed. Jasmine's 5th and last attempt on her life took an odd turn. Threatening her with a knife, the men made her stand on a number of stacked buckets, tied a noose around her neck, and fastened a rope to the ceiling. However, Thomas told Joshua to untie the noose because she might die after he unintentionally knocked over the buckets, causing them to roll on the floor. Evidently, the men found it difficult to cross the boundary of taking a life, even after all their efforts to get rid of Jasmine. Thomas later told Jasmine, dejectedly, that he was only doing this to avoid being caught with her, because he was afraid of going to jail. The mobile home's door was unexpectedly knocked on almost a month after Jasmine was kidnapped. A policeman was circulating the neighborhood to ask about a theft that had nothing to do with the kidnapping. The policeman left after the 3 suspects, who were all inside the house at the time, declined to answer the knock. The criminals realized they needed to find another hiding place immediately following the officer's visit. After placing Jasmine in a sports bag and escorting her into their vehicle, they let her exit the bag. In an attempt to find a new place to hide the girl, they first went to a number of cornfields before setting up camp at an abandoned house in Grant County. Jasmine feared for her life at the hands of Barker and his cronies, and by this time she was certain that they had no intention of letting her go alive. But good fortune was on the girl's side. She had an opportunity because of the kidnappers' negligence and the forced relocation to a new location. The previous day, the men had come across a police vehicle while driving and quickly threw some illegal substances out the window. They made the decision to look for those substances at the new location and had to purchase supplies for both themselves and their captive. They left Jasmine sitting in another car, thinking she wouldn't go anywhere, and told her they would be gone for approximately an hour. Thus, Jasmine was alone for the first time in 29 days following her kidnapping. After waiting for approximately 5 minutes after Thomas's car had driven away, she plucked up the courage to get out and hurriedly jumped out. In the hopes of finding assistance, she hurried to the 2 closest homes, but they appeared to be deserted. She didn't even think twice before jumping into the water when she spotted a house across Thompson Lake. In order to swim more quickly, she removed her pajama pants and shoes. When she got to the opposite shore, she saw Thomas's car as she crossed a field and came out onto the road. Jasmine hurried to hide in the grass, keeping low and trying to control her labored breathing so she wouldn't be noticed. She was so relieved to discover that she had erred in putting someone she had never met before behind the wheel. Jasmine ran across the street and across the field to a house close by. On Tuesday afternoon, local farmer Earl Melcher was meant to be at work, but he had to go home because he had forgotten his tools. He saw something strange in the distance among the grass before he got into his pickup truck to return to work. He thought it might be a deer grazing his field from hundreds of meters away, but when he saw it was a girl, he turned on his car and headed in her direction. When Jasmine heard the car, she rushed to meet him. The man was astounded by what he saw when the girl arrived at Earl's pickup and opened the door. In a single breath, Jasmine exclaimed, "Call the police! I am Jasmine Block and I have been abducted." But Earl had already seen the girl's face on posters around town, so he knew who she was. For him, as a farmer and the father of 3 daughters, it was an incredible sensation. He turned on the car's heater, sat Jasmine down, and gave her a towel. He was going to take her to the hospital when he called 911, but the emergency dispatcher advised him to wait for the police. When the police got there, they saw an absolutely unbelievable scene. Jasmine yelled, "There's that car," as Earl assisted her in getting into the sheriff's assistant's SUV. "That car is there." Incredibly, Stephen Powers was just by their house at that precise moment. The suspect was immediately pursued by one of the officers, who jumped into his vehicle. Powers was taken into custody following a comparatively brief pursuit. Shortly thereafter, Joshua Holby and Thomas Barker were captured. Jasmine's family thanked the brave farmer who just so happened to be home on that fateful day in the days after she returned home. Earl received a reward of $7,000 from the police for helping to save the girl. "Thank you, Earl," said the police chief, praising his actions. "This world is a better place because of people like you." To which Earl replied respectfully, "Anyone could have called 911. I was in the right place at the right time by chance." Earl already knew what he was going to do with the reward money. He gave the money to Jasmine and her family and invited them to lunch. He clarified that, although the sum meant a lot to him, Jasmine's family needed it far more than he did. Their family and friends were shocked to learn that Thomas, Joshua, and Stephen were the ones who had abducted the girl, even though they had previous criminal records. According to Thomas's sister, she couldn't fathom how her brother, who has cerebral palsy and uses a walker, could have managed to kidnap a teenager. She added that she helped with the search for the girl, and that Barker's wife and mother even went to the house where he was keeping her, but they had no suspicions. Thomas Barker was given a 25-year prison sentence for his actions toward his son's friend a year after the kidnapping. He will spend the rest of his life listed as a violent offender. He can, however, apply for civil commitment after being released from prison, and, if accepted, he will live out the rest of his days in a specialized facility. Stephen Powers will spend 8.5 years, and Joshua Holby will spend 8 years behind bars. Even though the girl managed to get away, the 29 days that the 3 men held her captive had a profound effect on her. Never again will she be the same. Her words, "None of us will be." She has trouble sleeping because she fears nightmares, and every time she closes her eyes, she sees the faces of the kidnappers. Jasmine finds it difficult to trust people these days, so she withdraws from them. "Fortunately," acknowledged Sarah, her mother, "the world is not without kind people." Jasmine had the chance to visit a post-traumatic stress disorder specialist in Texas to try out novel therapeutic approaches. She brought 2 gadgets home from the meeting that have been effectively assisting her in managing her PTSD symptoms, anxiety, and nightmares. In addition to these resources, Jasmine says she has found comfort in talking to friends and creating art as a way to express herself. She is getting better every day. In order to support other girls who might have gone through something similar, she made the decision to share her story. Jasmine smiles and responds that she just wants everyone to know that she is doing well when asked if she has anything else to share. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. A 19-year-old woman was discovered dead in her own apartment. Investigators quickly discovered several disturbing facts, but they were unable to solve the case for several years before revealing the truth. Everyone was shocked and outraged by the unexpected outcome. Nona Dismayed was born December 26, 1985, in Russellville, Arkansas. She grew up in a large family with 4 brothers and 1 sister. When Nona was 10 years old, her father died. This event was a tragedy for the entire family, but they were about to receive an even more devastating shock. Later, the young woman told her mother that her father had repeatedly subjected her to violence. She was afraid to speak up while he was still alive, and her confession shocked her mother. Even after such a tragic experience, the woman had no idea what her husband was capable of. Nona found the strength to move on and eventually decided to assist other young women who had been victims of similar crimes. She joined a volunteer organization to help children in need during her school years. Nona started dating a guy named Kevin Jones. The young woman also competed in beauty contests and achieved significant success. Nona won several local contests, qualifying her to compete for the title of Miss Arkansas. In addition, the young woman was an active member of the local church and sang in the choir. When Nona was 19, she and her boyfriend enrolled in Arkansas, which launched an attack on a university in their hometown. The young woman decided to rent her own apartment because she wanted to start her own life. After her first year, her boyfriend changed his major and transferred to another university, which was an hour and a half away from their home. By then, the couple had been dating for about 5 years, and this was their first time living in different cities. Kevin returned home for the Christmas holiday. He stopped by Nona's apartment before driving to his parents' house, which was about 16 kilometers away from the city. The following day, they both had plans. Nona had to take her final 2 exams while also meeting with a young woman from the volunteer organization. Kevin planned to take his mother, a librarian, to a school event on December 15th, around 9 a.m. Nona messaged Kevin, wishing him a good day. He was expecting Nona to call him after her exams and tell him how they went, but she wasn't returning his calls or messages, so he became concerned around 6 p.m. While attending a school event with his mother, Kevin couldn't help but wonder why Nona hadn't answered her phone all day. Kevin eventually decided to call his friend, who worked as a pizza deliveryman in the neighborhood where Nona's apartment complex was located. Kevin asked him to come by and see if everything was fine. His friend arrived quickly and noticed that Nona's car was parked in the parking lot, and the lights in her apartment were turned on, but no one was answering the door. He told Kevin about it, and Kevin told his mother that he was worried about his girlfriend and wanted to go to her apartment to make sure everything was fine. The woman agreed, and they headed to the apartment complex together. Kevin's friend was waiting for them there, and the 3 of them began knocking on the door, but there was no response. Kevin had a key, but he left it at home that day because he had no intention of stopping by. A few minutes later, Kevin and his friend attempted to open the front door because they suspected something bad had happened to Nona, but they were unable to do so. Kevin then remembered that there were sliding glass doors in the back of the apartment. When he approached them, he immediately noticed something strange. Nona was concerned about her own safety, so she installed a special removable grill on the back glass door whenever she was alone at home. They are primarily used against burglars. They are simple to install and remove from within the home, but extremely difficult to do from the outside. But this time, there was no grill, and the doors were unlocked. When they entered the apartment, they noticed blood on the blinds and discovered a shocking sight in the bedroom. Nona was lying face down in a pool of blood, wearing only socks. Kevin rushed over to her and attempted to lift her, only to realize she was dead. Meanwhile, his mother contacted police investigators, who arrived at the apartment and began investigating the crime scene. They immediately suspected that the victim had been struck on the head several times with a table lamp found on the floor. Investigators discovered a bloody fingerprint on the table lamp, possibly left by the killer next to the victim's body. They also found an empty condom wrapper on the bedside table and no signs of forced entry. Medical examiners confirmed that the table lamp was used as a weapon, with the metal base matching. Experts suggest that the perpetrator may have used a condom found in the apartment, making it difficult to determine the presence of sexual violence. However, the crime scene was not thoroughly examined, with investigators failing to collect blood samples from the blinds on the back door or search for shoe prints in the apartment, which could have been used. When he entered the apartment and ran to her, He tried to lift her up, and upon realizing that she was dead, he hugged and held her. The police found this behavior strange and suspected that Kevin had done it deliberately by hugging the victim and getting covered in her blood he may have destroyed potential evidence and compromised the crime scene. Why it would be difficult for investigators to prove his guilt. For example, if Kevin's clothes or nails were found with the victim's blood, it could easily be explained that he hugged the victim after discovering her body. Another suspicious moment was that Kevin went to check on his girlfriend not alone but with his mother, and he also invited his friend to the apartment. Investigators believed that this way he secured 2 witnesses who found the body with him and saw him covered in blood. The police talked to Kevin for a long time right outside Nona's apartment, and from their questions the young man realized that they considered him a suspect. Then he said something that strengthened the investigators' conviction that he was the murderer, recognizing that he was suspected. Kevin began arguing with the investigators, stating that he constantly watches Law and Order and is aware that they are attempting to convict him. These words also appear strange to the police. In addition, they discovered that the key to Nona's apartment was only with 3 people: the girlfriend, her mother, and Kevin. Given the lack of evidence of a break-in, they assumed the man used his copy of the key to enter the apartment. Kevin was interrogated at the police station for several hours. During the interrogation, he told investigators his version of events and insisted he had nothing to do with the murder. However, investigators directly accused him of the murder and urged him to confess. Around 4 p.m., after numerous attempts to call his girlfriend, Kevin sent a message asking if she was still alive, despite the fact that Nona had already died. When the police left the interrogation room and left Kevin alone, he stood up and began punching the back of the chair for the investigators. This became another indication that the young man was violent and capable of murder. However, the police found no evidence linking Kevin to the murder. Medical experts discovered that Nona attempted to defend herself, which would have resulted in bruises and scratches on the killer's body, but none were found on Kevin. Despite this, the detectives remained convinced he was guilty and attempted to gather evidence. After interviewing over 50 people, the police were unable to find any witnesses. However, after speaking with known friends, they discovered that shortly before her death, she had begun seeing another man secretly from Kevin. Investigators immediately checked this person, but he had a solid alibi for the time of the murder, which raised suspicions about Kevin. She was killed with extreme cruelty, which in most similar cases indicates the killer's strong personal animosity toward the victim. A few days later, Kevin agreed to take a polygraph test. The operator concluded that the young man provided numerous false answers, and one of the investigators claimed that this was the worst polygraph result he had ever seen in his 28 years of experience. However, there is one caveat: the person who read the device's readings was not a certified specialist. He was simply a police officer who had not received the necessary training to work with this device, which did not bother the detectives. Following the interrogation, they increased the pressure on Kevin, attempting to force a confession. They claimed that all his acquaintances and relatives already knew that he killed Nona. The police really told everyone that Kevin's guilt was practically proven, and that he would soon be arrested. They convinced the victim's parents that he was the one who killed their daughter, although they refused to believe it. Until the end, the day before the funeral, a farewell ceremony was supposed to take place in the church, and Kevin had been helping to organize it since early in the morning. Later on, detectives called him in for questioning again, promising to release him before the start of the ceremony. In the end, Kevin spent 7 hours at the police station and missed the ceremony. Nobody present knew he was being questioned, so many assumed that Kevin didn't show up due to guilt over what had happened. His parents didn't even want him to come to the funeral, as investigators had already convinced them of his involvement in the murder. But Kevin still came and sat far away from her relatives. After examining evidence from the victim's apartment, experts discovered a fingerprint on the light bulb in the desk lamp. The fingerprint was left by blood, indicating that it could only have been made during or after the murder. Despite this, investigators continued to search for Kevin for months. This request was granted, and the trial began in a different city. The defense called a witness who provided Kevin with a solid alibi. A plumber had visited his parents' house that morning and saw him around 10:30 a.m. The prosecution insisted that Kevin had time to go to Nandes and commit the murder because, according to medical experts, she died between 10:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. They also shared an interesting fact. Kevin had turned off his phone between 10 a.m. and 12 p.m., which coincided with the victim's murder. Furthermore, Data from Kevin's phone revealed that he only began calling his girlfriend at 4 p.m., despite claims during questioning that he had been trying to reach her all day. However, at the time, the young man may have meant both calls and messages. Lawyers presented 2 additional witnesses, both of whom testified that Kevin did not commit the murder. One of them was Kevin's grandmother, who stated that on that particular day, she saw her grandson near the gas station and gave him money to go have a snack at a cafe. Another witness saw the man between 12:30 and 1 p.m. at the restaurant, and the establishment's cameras captured him eating lunch. As a result, the young man could not have committed the murder while simultaneously returning in time. Lawyers also questioned the possibility that Kevin left a bloody fingerprint on the lamp during the murder in that case. When the body was discovered, the blood should have dried up. Experts who came to the apartment that evening wrote in the report that the bloody fingerprint was slightly damp, confirming that Kevin could have left it accidentally when he found Nona's body with his mother and friend. However, fingerprints were also found on the table lamp that was used to hit the victim, but they did not belong to Kevin. He determined that after death, the victim's body lay on her back for some time before being turned face down. This could imply that the young woman is still subjected to violence. The expert confirmed that he found no direct evidence of this, but added that he could not rule out such a possibility. The prosecution claimed that no fingerprints or DNA were found on the empty contraceptive package found next to the victim's body. However, a retest revealed male DNA, which did not belong to Kevin and did not match any databases. The trial lasted over a year and was concluded by the jury in July 2007. And now that he had avoided punishment despite their client's acquittal, the legal team promised to keep working on the case and find the true killer. Given the police's obsession with Kevin, no one expected them to finally do their job correctly. The lawyers first extracted DNA from the contraceptive packaging. Compared to all the men who knew Nona, all of these people volunteered to provide samples, and none of them matched. This went on for 2 months until an unexpected event occurred in September 2007. When the police arrested Gary Dunn for robbery, things became more interesting. First, this man had previously been convicted of assaulting another woman. Second, he lived in the same housing complex as Nona. In the early stages of the investigation, the police considered Gary as a suspect but quickly switched their focus to Kevin as the killer. The boy's lawyers requested a DNA test, which revealed that a sample from the contraceptive packaging matched Gary's DNA. After the young woman's murder, investigators even questioned Gary using a polygraph. Gary did go shopping with his mother, just not at the time of the murder, but 2 days before, as evidenced by receipts with purchase dates, which Gary even showed to the police, but they simply ignored such important information. They noticed that the dates on the checks did not match the day of the murder. This was stated in the reports, but for unknown reasons, they either ignored it or failed to notice that the days did not match. Finally, experts compared his fingerprints to those of unknown table lamps, and they matched. However, a serious issue arose here. The fingerprints and DNA matched, but not completely. The judicial system follows certain guidelines. In Gary's case, the necessary coincidence indicators for determining guilt were insufficient, despite the fact that the DNA and fingerprints were unlikely to belong to someone else. The investigators were likely guilty because they did not thoroughly examine all available evidence immediately after the murder, as required by the rules. It is possible that the DNA samples deteriorated. He was on parole in 2002. He attacked a woman who was running in the park, knocked her down, and began beating her, threatening to kill her. The woman escaped and ran to her car. Meanwhile, Gary fled the scene but was quickly apprehended. The man served 19 months in prison and was released early. Interestingly, his DNA sample was not included in the database. Gary's trial began in April 2010, and there were plenty of surprises in store for everyone. His own wife testified against him, claiming he was an aggressive and dangerous man. Gary frequently raised his hand against her, and the woman was terrified for her life, so she was afraid to leave him. But the most intriguing detail was that, a few weeks before the victim's death, she noticed her husband spying on Nona through her apartment window. Based on this, the prosecution assumed that the man planned the attack because of his criminal history. Gary had a history of violence, and he may have been keeping a close eye on Nona because she lived only a few meters away. On December 15th, he decided to act. He allegedly knocked on her apartment door, and entered under false pretenses, grabbing the table lamp and striking her several times before assaulting and killing her, because Gary used contraception. Medical experts were unable to definitively state whether the victim had been sexually assaulted, but all evidence pointed to it. Gary's lawyers denied his involvement, but he had no real alibi, so they concentrated on blaming Kevin, according to the lawyers. Kevin discovered that the young woman was cheating on him and killed her. Kevin had to testify in court and listen as they attempted to portray him as the true criminal. The prosecution was unable to use Gary's fingerprints or DNA as evidence, resulting in a mistrial. A new trial was soon held, with a key difference being testimony from a woman who Gary nearly killed in 2002. The woman described how the man attacked her and how she barely escaped. Despite this, the second trial was declared a mistrial. First, he tried to kidnap a woman from a church parking lot, but she fought him back. A few hours later, Gary stripped in front of another woman in a mall parking lot and was quickly arrested. Given his criminal record, and the fact that he is practically known as killer, the court decided to sentence him to the maximum term. Gary was sentenced to 15 years in prison for 2 incidents and is still serving his sentence. Despite his right to petition for early release, authorities are unlikely to grant him such an opportunity. They also have the right to charge him with murder for the 3rd time, but they are not rushing to do so. The likelihood of the new trial ending in the same way as the previous 2 is high, so investigators are gathering more information. During the trial preparation, Kevin discovered that Gary's polygraph test results revealed lies, but investigators did not consider him a suspect. Unfortunately, his lawsuit was dismissed due to the statute of limitations. As a result, negligent police officers did not face any consequences for allowing the real killer to roam free for years and may not be punished in the future. Please leave your thoughts on this story in the comments, and thank you for watching.